Hey guys, tonight we're going back way back to a time of longboats and loud sheep. You're not a Viking warrior, not tonight. No sword, no shield, no epic sea raid. Tonight, you're something arguably more important, the village sheep dyer. The one who makes the tunics colorful, the tapestries vibrant, the cloaks worth fighting over. No one sings songs about you. But without you, everyone would look like they rolled around in ash. So, dignity, right? Right now, it's cold. Of course it is. You're in the Northlands. The fog sits low over the earth like spilled milk, and the morning air bites your nose before you even open the door. You pull on your woolen tunic, dyed obviously by your own glorious hands, and trudge out into the field. Your boots squelch through the muddy grass as sheep begin to bleat. Loudly. They know you, and they know breakfast doesn't pour from your pockets. The pen's gate creaks like it's complaining too, and you step inside the enclosure. Immediately, one of the older sheep headbutts your thigh. That's Froda. She's 11 years old, has an attitude, and once bit your apprentice on the butt. A hero, really. You run your fingers through her fleece, checking for burrs, twigs, or signs of sickness. The wool is thick, creamy, and just about ready for harvest. If you time it right, today could be shearing day if you don't freeze your fingers off first. You make your rounds, murmuring the names of your sheep like a bedtime story in reverse. There's Red Nose, who once rubbed up against a brick wall, Eyebrow, who actually has one, and Stinktail. Well, let's not talk about Stinktail. Somewhere behind you, a raven cackles from a fence post. You throw it a look. Not dead yet, you mutter, wiping dew off your beard. The bird does not look convinced. Sheep herding might seem like the quiet life, but it's deceptively chaotic. One wrong fence post and the entire flock could be munching your neighbor's barley in under 10 minutes. And Freydis doesn't take kindly to woolly invaders. Last time she came at you with a stick and accusations of witchcraft. As you walk, you notice small hoofprints near the edge of the field. Probably a fox last night, or worse, one of the neighbor kids playing Steal the Sheep. Again. You take a moment to breathe in. The air smells like wet grass, sheep oil, and morning. For a second, it's peaceful. Then Froda farts loudly and ruins it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this sleepy little Viking journey travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You grab your walking stick, once belonged to your grandfather, who swore it was carved from a sacred ash tree, and start leading the flock toward the riverbank. You'll need the water later. Might as well check the flow now. The path is slick with frost and sheep droppings, which together create a slippery cocktail that nearly sends you flying. By the time you reach the stream, the sun has just begun to warm the tops of the trees. It's going to be a long day, but if the weather holds and the sheep behave, you just might pull it off. You crouch at the water's edge, splash a bit on your face, and look at your reflection. You've got dye stains in your beard and something purple in your eyebrow. You sigh. Historians still argue whether Viking dyers had a formal apprenticeship system, but you're living proof that nobody learns this trade without at least a few chemical burns and one near-death experience involving a vat of fermented woad. You glance over your shoulder. The sheep have started to wander. Of course they have. Back to work, you mutter, and the day officially begins. The sheep aren't the only thing that wanders this morning. You do too, basket in hand, heading for the scrubby hills beyond your pasture. This is your daily foraging trip, a scavenger hunt for color. Not food, not firewood, color. The stuff that turns plain wool into something that makes traders raise an eyebrow and ask, ooh, what shade is that? The kind of thing that gets you extra silver at the market, or at least a crust of better bread. You move past stunted birch trees, your breath fogging like a ghost as you kick through brambles. You're searching for your usual suspects. Madder root for red, woad leaves for blue, a few clingy lichens for ochre or soft green. It's all here, but you've got to know where to look, and the best spots like treasure are hidden and hard-earned. Madder's a tricky beast. It grows low to the ground, sprawling like lazy vines with roots that burrow deep. You kneel, push aside some leaves, and start to dig. The roots smell earthy, like carrots left too long underground. You run your fingers over the rough surface, thick and red-stained. This one's been here a while. Perfect. You drop it into your basket with a thud and keep moving. You have to gather enough for at least 3 dye batches. You also have to hope none of the good patches were trampled by goats because goats have no respect for boundaries or artistry. Then there's woad. Woad, the queen of all dye plants and arguably your greatest frenemy. When fresh, the leaves look like a boring salad, but if you crush and ferment them just right, they give you the most haunting sea-deep blue. Not navy, not sky. Viking blue, a color that seems to hum if you stare at it too long. The catch, the process is involved. And by involved, we mean revolting. You find a patch of woad and pluck a few handfuls, crushing the leaves lightly between your fingers. They smell faintly like mustard and mud. Lovely. You wrap them in cloth and tuck them gently into the basket. Later, you'll have to mash them into pulp, steep them in your infamous secret blend of stale urine and ashes, then stir until your arms ache. A lot of people think dyeing wool is just dunking things into color and whistling. Those people are wrong. Dyeing is part gardening, part alchemy, part swamp wizardry. And this early in the morning, it's mostly about hoping your fingers don't freeze off before you finish picking lichen off a rock. Speaking of lichen, you scrape a few purple-crusted patches from a boulder near the trail. They're slow-growing, stingy with pigment, and only certain kinds actually yield color. But when they work, you get rich purples, smudgy grays, even subtle lavenders that make traders' wives swoon. You squint at the lichen in your palm. Please be the right kind, you murmur, then bag it anyway. Dyeing is a gamble, always has been. Historians still argue whether Vikings had formalized recipes for dyes or just passed things down through trial error and wild guesses. If your notes, the ones scrawled on the back of fish-skin scrolls, are anything to go by, it's mostly the latter. As you hike back toward your cottage, the sun rises higher, bathing the valley in a weak golden light. You pass an old tree stump where someone, maybe you, maybe your grandfather, once carved runes of luck and fortune. You always touch it on the way home, just in case. Back at the homestead, your apprentice has arrived, late, again. He's standing next to the dye hut holding the shears backward and staring into space like someone just asked him to calculate the angle of Thor's hammer. His tunic is inside out, his hair full of straw, and one of his shoes appears to belong to a child. "You're early," you say with a smirk. He jumps. "Am I?" He blinks. "Oh, that's good, right?" You sigh. You think about the time he mistook alum for flour and nearly poisoned the goats. You think about the day he tripped into the yellow dye vat and came out looking like a terrified sunflower. And you think mostly about how he's the only help you've got. You toss him the basket. Time to sort and crush. I want the madder root peeled, the woad prepped, and don't you dare mix the lichen with the urine pot again. He nods enthusiastically, then stops. Wait, which one's the urine pot again? You point to the one with the angry face carved on it. It's a system. He gets to work, sort of, and you take a moment to breathe in the sharp morning air. You look at your hands already stained red and green from your harvest. By the end of the day, they'll be worse. You'll have scratches from roots, welts from boiling cauldrons, and at least one splinter from that stupid old stirring stick. But right now, it's peaceful for now. The pot waits for you like a threat squatting in the corner of your dye shed covered with a flat stone lid and exuding the faint menace of something that's been fermenting far too long. This is where the blue magic happens. Or the blue disaster, depending on the day. You lift the lid, flinch, then nod. It smells exactly as it should, like rot vinegar and shame. That means it's ready. The secret ingredient, of course, is stale human urine. And not just yours, no one can drink enough ale to sustain a serious woad operation. You've got neighbors contributing. Voluntarily. Kind of. The deal is, you give them dyed cloth scraps, and they give you full jugs in return, the barter economy at its finest. Woad, you see, isn't like other dyes. You can't just simmer the leaves and call it a day. First, you ferment them with urine until they form a slimy, indigo-tinted slurry. Then you add oxygen by stirring or splashing or cursing at it until it foams into a blue froth that smells like a Viking's foot after a 10-day raid. The smell alone could qualify as a weapon. You tie a scarf around your nose and begin the stirring. The paddle, a long stick carved from beechwood, groans as you swirl it through the muck. Bubbles rise to the surface. You keep stirring. More bubbles. The color shifts from greenish swamp to bruised blue. That's a good sign. Your apprentice peeks in from the doorway. Is it supposed to make that sound? No, you say, that's new. Historians still argue whether Viking dyers used only their own household urine or relied on communal collection systems. Some evidence from urban sites suggests a more organized process, possibly even guild-controlled piss vats. You hope that's true, if only for the image of an official Viking P-tax. You swirl again. This time the foam rises in thick clumps, like sea foam left too long in the sun. Perfect. You cover the vat again, sealing in both the color and the stench. There's a reason most dye huts sit on the edge of town. You step outside and take a few deep breaths to clear your nose. The air smells better out here, like pine smoke and sheep grease. Maybe even a hint of berries from that time you tried to make natural pink dye. Didn't work. Just made everything smell like jam and disappointment. You wipe your hands on your apron, which is already a patchwork of failed experiments. You once tried dyeing with crushed beetles, expensive, exotic, and completely useless, unless you wanted the wool to smell like a butcher's stall. The apprentice still has nightmares about that batch. You turn back toward the shed and sigh. Time to prep the next batch of woad leaves. You pull them from the cloth sack, crush them gently with your fingers, and dump them into a smaller pot. These won't ferment, they're going in fresh to make a quicker blue. It'll still take hours. You pour in water heated from the morning's fire and begin to mash. The wooden pestle squishes through the leaves' dark green juice, squirting out and pooling like spilled paint. You add a handful of ash to balance the pH, something you learned by trial error in one spectacular explosion involving too much vinegar. Why not just use berries your apprentice calls from outside, presumably while doing something inefficient? Because berries fade, you yell back. They're liars. They promise purple, then fade to sadness. He doesn't answer, which means either he's offended or he's stepped in something terrible. Either way, he's quiet now. A win. You continue mashing until your arms ache, until the mix has turned into a pulpy sludge. The dyeing process is half muscle, half patience, and half trying not to let the goats eat your tools while your back is turned. Yes, that's 3 halves. Welcome to Viking math. Outside the hut, you hear the familiar thump of sheep being wrangled. Looks like the apprentice has remembered you own livestock. Good for him. You let the leaf mixture steep, covering the pot with a cloth to keep the flies out. They love this stuff, which probably says more about flies than dye. Then you start prepping the wool skeins of it, washed and carded, ready for their dip into the blue abyss. You touch the wool like you're greeting an old friend. It's soft, clean, a little coarse around the edges, just like you. You twist one strand experimentally, watching how the light plays along the fibers. Undyed, it's a dull gray-white. Useful but boring. The kind of color that makes people squint and ask, is that the finished piece? Not for long. You carry the skeins to the edge of the shed, ready for dipping. You'll do that later, after the steeping, after the breathing, after at least one more argument with your apprentice about what counts as clean. Right now, you rest your hands on your hips, survey your steaming vats, and smell the smoke curling from the cooking fire. It's not glamorous, it's not heroic, but it's yours. And it smells slightly less like fermented feet than usual. The sheep look suspicious, and honestly, you can't blame them. You're approaching with a comb the size of a small paddle and a glint in your eye that says, I'm about to ruin your day. It's time to brush the fleece, and they know it. Froda, your oldest ewe, stands firm in the middle of the pen, like a woolly queen, daring you to try. The younger sheep shift nervously tails, flicking, already edging toward the far corner. Your apprentice is nowhere in sight. Again. You crack your knuckles, plant your boots, and start with Froda. Always start with Froda. She's stubborn but oddly cooperative if she's first. You slip a bucket under her belly for balance, mutter a half-hearted apology, and begin dragging the comb through her dense, greasy fleece. The lanolin clings to your hands immediately, a thick, waxy coat that smells like sheep and old grass. Useful stuff, really. Your grandmother used to rub it on her hands all winter and swore it kept her young. Didn't work, but her hands were terrifyingly soft. The comb pulls through a mat of burrs and twigs, yanking free a whole bird's nest worth of junk. Froda grunts but doesn't kick. Progress. As you work, your mind wanders. Viking society didn't just value warriors, and shipwrights artisans like you mattered too. Clothing, banners, and sails all depended on dyers and weavers. Without your work raids would be chilly, and weddings would be beige. And yet, no one sings songs about Thorkel the Dye Man. A tragedy. Historians still argue whether sheep in Viking Age Scandinavia were brushed regularly, or if most wool was processed only post-shearing. There's evidence both ways. Textile remnants show surprisingly clean wool in some places, while others seem to have sheared straight from the mud. You pause and pick out a beetle, still alive. It waves one tiny leg as if offended. You set it gently on a fence post. Wrong fleece friend. Your apprentice arrives finally carrying a bowl of barley porridge and chewing with his mouth open. Want some, he asks, spoon hovering midair. You glance at your hands glistening with lanolin and sheep gunk. Not unless you've developed a new kink. He shrugs and sits on a bale of hay watching you work. So why not just shave them all now? You exhale through your nose, because combing makes the shearing easier. No knots, no accidents. Remember last spring. He grimaces. Oh, right. Blood, got it. You move to the next sheep, a jittery ram named Bork. He's young and full of bad ideas. The comb barely touches him before he leaps sideways, knocking over a bucket and nearly taking your wrist with him. Get the rope, you say, through clenched teeth. The apprentice obliges, though he stops first to eat another bite of porridge. You mutter a few colorful phrases in Old Norse under your breath. Bork dances away again, this time knocking over the fence gate. 2 other sheep immediately follow. Oh, for Freya's sake. You drop the comb and sprint after them, boots thudding through the muddy grass as you shout the sheep's names like they owe you money. The apprentice jogs behind you, still holding the bowl. The sheep veer toward the dye shed. You get there just in time to stop one from toppling a vat of prepared mordant. The second sheep slips and lands in a pile of woad-stained straw, giving itself a nice green butt. The third just stands there, confused, chewing on a bootlace that might be yours. You corral them all back into the pen using sheer willpower, a stick, and a lot of loud grunting. Froda looks unimpressed. Bork looks smug. You look like you've aged a year in 10 minutes. The apprentice finally says, that went better than last time. You glare at him. You say that like it's comforting. Back to combing. You finally finish half the flock before your shoulders start to seize up. Your hands are sore, your fingers sticky, and you've inhaled enough sheep dander to coat your lungs in fuzz. But the fleece is cleaner, smoother, and much easier to work with. You set the comb aside, stretch your arms over your head, and glance at the clouds rolling in from the fjord. Hopefully just clouds. Not a storm, not again. From inside the house, you hear your partner call out, there's warm cider and less judgment in here if you want it. You smile despite yourself. In a minute, you yell back. You still have 2 more sheep to brush. Might as well finish the job while you still have momentum and enough daylight. By now, the sheep have calmed. Even Bork has stopped kicking long enough for you to run the comb down his spine. Soft, even fleece like thick fog caught in a net. Soon, it will be soaked, spun dyed, and sent across the sea. You lean against the fence comb dangling from your wrist and exhale, progress. The apprentice arrives late to the next part of the day's routine, which is both expected and irritating. You're already halfway into the sheep shearing by the time he comes stumbling out of the cottage wearing a tunic you're fairly certain belongs to someone's grandmother. It's embroidered with flowers. Bold choice. I brought the shears, he announces, brandishing them like he's just returned from battle. The blades glint in the sun, slightly rusted, slightly crooked, just like your faith in his abilities. Great, you mutter now. Go catch Bork. He freezes. You're serious. Bork, now very aware of the word shears, is pressed into a corner of the pen, eyes, wild legs twitching. You can almost hear the gears turning in his woolly little brain. Escape or die trying. The apprentice takes 1 step toward him. Bork bolts. The next 10 minutes are chaos. You, your apprentice, and 2 angry chickens chase Bork in concentric circles, while the other sheep watch unimpressed. Eventually, Bork trips over his own hooves and flops to the ground in a puff of dust and defiance. Victory! Your apprentice gasps, collapsing next to him. You crouch down, brush a leaf off Bork's head, and gently grip the shears. The real work begins. There's a rhythm to shearing. Push, snip, shift, snip. The fleece comes off in heavy curling sheets, revealing pink skin beneath. Bork shivers but stays still, resigned to his fate. You keep your strokes smooth and confident. Nicking the sheep means pain, and pain means lawsuits, or at least angry bleats and frothing neighbors. The fleece falls around your boots like melting snow, thick and greasy with lanolin. A good yield. This will take dye well. You remember something a traveling merchant once told you: Viking wool was some of the most sought after in the known world, not just for warmth, but for how it took color, held shape, and whispered stories in its weave. Your hands are part of that legacy now, rough, stained, calloused hands shaping the fabric of a culture. You switch to the next sheep. This one, a calm, older ram named Snorri, actually seems to enjoy the process. He sighs deeply as you trim him down, eyes half-lidded in relaxation. You make a mental note to reward him later with something nice, maybe a whole turnip, or at least a scratch behind the ears. The apprentice takes over with a small ewe. You hover over his shoulder like a vulture made of judgment. Not so close to the skin. Angle the blade or you'll catch a flap. He nods, adjusts, and immediately makes the exact mistake you just warned about. The ewe squeals. You take the shears back. Go help bundle fleece instead. Historians still argue whether Viking shearing tools were specialized or just repurposed knives and farm blades. The truth likely varies. Rural families probably used what they had, while professional wool workers used honed shears. Yours are somewhere in between serviceable ugly and engraved with a rune that supposedly wards off hand cramps. You finish the last sheep just as the sun reaches its highest point. The fleece piles up beside the pen in soft golden heaps, tangible proof of your labor. You wipe your brow and admire the wool. Some fleeces are thick and dense, perfect for cloaks. Others are finer, suited for tunics or socks. The colors vary too, from creamy white to charcoal gray, with one sheep offering a cinnamon tint that always takes dye like a dream. You and the apprentice carry the bundles to the edge of the stream. They'll need washing before anything else can happen. But first, lunch. You sit by the water, pulling out a hunk of cheese and a stale barley cake. It's not much, but it's tradition. You offer half to your apprentice. He declines. He's chewing on a raw turnip. Suit yourself. The stream gurgles nearby, lazy and clear. You dip your feet in, letting the cold water numb your aching toes. The sheep mill about nearby, newly naked and oddly smug. The wind shifts and brings the scent of wet wool and warm sun. You inhale deeply. This is the part they never write about in the sagas. Not the raids, the dragons, or the duels, but the tired, happy hum of midday after a job well done. This you think is the good stuff, until a wet sheep sneezes directly into your lap. The stream is clear and cold, curling around rocks and your ankles with that particular bite only northern rivers know. You've dumped the first bundle of fleece into the shallows, and now you're elbow deep in sheep fluff, trying to wrestle out the mud oil and miscellaneous nature clumps embedded in every strand. Don't just swish it. You call to the apprentice who is holding a clump of wool like it might explode. Scrub. Beat it against the stone if you have to. The water won't do all the work. He grumbles something about frozen fingers and sits down with a sigh that somehow manages to sound lazy and persecuted at the same time. You dunk a skein under again and press it flat against a smooth rock. The lanolin clouds up the water in silky plumes, turning it milky, almost mystical. Washing fleece is an art too gentle, and nothing gets clean. Too rough, and you ruin the fibers. You've ruined enough batches to know the difference. A trout flicks by your toes, clearly judging you. You try to ignore it. Washing wool is one of those medieval tasks that looks peaceful to the untrained eye, but in truth, it's a battle against time, temperature, and texture. You're hunched wet, and your sleeves are already soaking despite your best efforts. The wool is heavy, saturated, and full of surprises, twigs, beetles, and once a dead mouse. That was not a good dye week. The stream continues to babble like an old gossip while you scrub. It knows all your secrets, how many dye pots you've ruined, how often you talked to the sheep, the time you dropped an entire bundle downstream and chased it barefoot for half a mile. The stream remembers everything. Historians still argue whether Vikings washed fleece before or after spinning. Some say pre-washing was more common to remove the worst of the grime, while others believe lanolin was preserved on purpose for ease of spinning. You fall somewhere in the middle. If it smells worse than the dye hut, it gets a wash. The apprentice holds up a dripping skein, looking proud. You raise an eyebrow. It's still brown. It's less brown. You splash water in his general direction. After a while, you develop a rhythm. Soak, scrub, rinse, ring. It's oddly meditative. Your fingers go numb, then warm up, then numb again. The wool begins to lighten visibly cleaner, more manageable, less earthy. You can almost see the potential colors forming in your mind's eye: crimson, indigo, golden ochre. But first, it must be pure. There's a sort of metaphor in that you think. Beauty comes after the mess, but only if you scrub hard enough. Eventually, you pull the last skein from the water, shake it out, and hang it on the makeshift rack you've propped against a birch tree. The breeze will do the rest, though you'll need to keep an eye out for thieving birds. Corvids especially. Last month, a raven made off with an entire dyed wool ball. You still see it sometimes, flying over the fjord, flashing blue like some sort of fiber optic omen. Your apprentice sprawls in the grass hands, wrinkled cheeks pink from cold water and exertion. How did anyone figure all this out, he asks. You sit beside him and shrug. Desperation, boredom, or someone really wanted a red tunic and got way too experimental with beetles. He laughs. I mean, who first said, hey, let's pee in a bucket for 3 weeks, throw some leaves in it, then dunk our clothes and see what happens? You grin. The first Viking artist, probably. The wind shifts again. You smell hearth smoke, wet grass, and something faintly metallic from the copper cauldron back home. The world smells raw and real. You lean back, staring up at the sky, which is patchy with clouds, but still bright enough to hurt your eyes. Above you, a hawk circles. Below you, the stream gurgles on, and beside you, the apprentice begins to snore. You let him rest. The fleece is clean. The next phase is almost ready, and your arms feel like they've wrestled a bear. You gather up the now dripping bundles, wring them one last time, and sling them over your shoulder like defeated enemies. There's satisfaction in the wait. The hard part's not over, but it's always good to tick a step off the list. Back at the dye hut, you spread the fleece out to dry on racks, rocks, and anything that doesn't move. The sun peeks through the clouds just enough to be helpful. You mutter a quiet thanks to Friar and grab a handful of alum, your next ingredient in this long, smelly saga of color. But that's for later. For now, the wool is clean, the sheep are naked, and you've got enough moisture in your boots to sprout moss. You sit down by the fire pit, rub your aching shoulders, and take a swig of whatever's in that mystery jug someone left last week. Possibly mead, possibly something illegal. Either way, it burns nicely. The sun, now hanging slightly westward, glints off your collection of oddly shaped jars and dented metal bowls lined up near the dye shed. Today's agenda: preparing the mordants. You'd call it chemistry if the gods hadn't invented it first. Or maybe they just dropped a few metal chunks into a vat one day and thought, yes, let's make this human someone else's problem. You grab the familiar tin of alum powdered in pails, slightly gritty to the touch. It's one of your go-to mordants, the thing that fixes color into wool so it doesn't run off at the first drizzle. You've also got copper scraps, iron shavings, and when you're feeling especially daring, old bronze coins someone swore were cursed. You keep those in a special pouch, labeled use only when absolutely desperate or very bored. The apprentice plods over hair, still damp from the stream. What's a mordant again? Like a spice. You stop mid-pour and stare at him. No, it's not cumin. It's what makes the color stick. Without it all, this wool turns back into sad soup rags the second it gets wet. He nods solemnly, so it's like magic glue. You sigh. Sure, magic glue, just don't eat it. He does not promise that. You fill your first pot with water toss in a healthy dose of alum and stir with the same beechwood stick you use for nearly everything. The water shifts, grows cloudy, and begins to shimmer faintly as the alum dissolves. You like this part. It's subtle quiet. The science behind the sorcery. Historians still argue whether mordants were widely used in Viking Age Scandinavia, or if their use was restricted to more elite textile production. There's evidence that alum was traded extensively, even reaching northern settlements from the east. But whether your average backwoods dyer used it, or just hoped for the best, is anyone's guess. You pour the alum solution into a second cauldron, where the cleaned fleece now soaks each strand, beginning to take on that ever-so-slight slickness of pre-dyed preparation. The smell is metallic sharp, like hot pennies and forest moss. Next up, the copper mordant. You scrape some old verdigris-crusted metal into a bowl, grind it fine with a stone pestle, and tip it into another pot. The water turns a sickly teal, then deepens. Some dyers avoid copper, say it's too finicky, too toxic, too moody. But you've learned to respect its temperament. Like working with a drunk nobleman, you just smile, nod, and keep your hands steady. The apprentice wanders over Pier's Inn. This one smells like frogs. You nod, and the next one will smell like rust. Sure enough, the iron pot is next. Rust flakes from salvaged tools, old shears, broken plowheads, nails scavenged from a wrecked longship. You dissolve them into another brew, this one more temperamental than the others. Iron deepens color, but also dulls brightness. It's the trade-off of a richer tone for a little melancholy. You lean back, arms crossed, as all three pots bubble and hiss beside each other like strange soup. The fire under them crackles, and the air smells like a smithy got into a fistfight with a dye shop. Your apprentice squints. Do we mix them all together? You recoil like he suggested marrying your goat. Absolutely not. Each wool batch gets one mordant, unless you like your tunics blotchy and cursed. You walk him through the basics: alum for bright reds and yellows, copper for greens and blues, iron for somber grays and dark browns. There's no universal formula. It's trial and error, memory and instinct. And once a suggestion from a dream involving a talking squirrel. That one turned out well, surprisingly. You lay out the fleece to soak in each pot, weighing it down with smooth river stones. It needs time. Time to open its fibers, absorb the metal, prepare for the color journey ahead. You touch each skein as you go, little blessings, little hopes. One of the copper pots spits a bubble. You glare at it. Not today, demon. The apprentice raises a brow. Do you talk to the dye? Only when I want it to behave, you mutter and continue. The sun inches lower, casting golden light through the birch trees. You sit back on a log, stretch your legs, and roll your shoulders. The fire warms your boots. The scent of metal wool and distant sheep lingers in the air. You think about how few people understand this process. To most, dyeing is just dipping something in color. But here, in your little patch of the world, it's about transformation. Elemental transformation. You take roots, rocks, plants, and sheep, and you make art. Art that travels. Art that survives. Art that stains history. You hear a strange splash. Apprentice, you call. A long silence. Then I may have dropped my shoe in the iron pot. Of course he did. You close your eyes. Just don't put it back on. The fleece is soaking. The mordants are doing their work. And your apprentice is slowly, painfully becoming marginally less useless. You let the heat of the fire sink into your bones. For a brief, shining moment, you consider a nap. The fire crackles low as you lean over the largest cauldron, blackened from years of use and flecked with the ghosts of past dye sessions. It's time for the moment of truth, or at least the moment of extremely smelly boiling. The dye cauldron needs to be prepped, and like everything else in this trade, it's both delicate and chaotic. You set aside the mordanted skeins, now slightly stiff from their mineral baths, and turn your attention to the fire pit. The apprentice crouches beside it, trying to coax the flame higher, using a bundle of damp twigs and far too much enthusiasm. You'll smoke us both out, you mutter, nudging him aside with your boot. Let it breathe. He backs away, eyes watering. It was working until it wasn't. With the grace of someone who's burned their eyebrows off at least once you rearrange the firewood strike flint and puff until the flames leap like hungry wolves. The cauldron goes on top with a satisfying thunk. You fill it with fresh spring water and toss in a few fistfuls of dried madder root, your main ingredient for red today, or at least reddish-orange. The dye gods are fickle. Madder root is one of the few ancient dyes that still mystifies modern scientists. Its color varies depending on soil, water, age, and possibly lunar alignment, though that last part may have been a joke your grandmother started just to mess with you. Still, you once got a perfect crimson on a full moon. So who's laughing now? You stir the root into the water with your dye paddle long stained and slightly warped from decades of use. The smell rises immediately, earthy, sour, almost sweet if you squint your nose a little. It smells like wet clay and forgotten cellars, like something powerful, just shy of dangerous. The apprentice peeks in. It looks like stew for cannibals. Only if they're very fashionable, you say, and keep stirring. The fire pops. The cauldron bubbles. The mixture darkens. Slowly, like dusk falling over a forest, the water shifts from brown to deep red. Not bright, not cherry, but ancient. The kind of red that looks good on warriors and terrifying on priests. You add a splash of vinegar to help set the tone and mutter an old rhyme under your breath, one your mother used when she dyed wool for winter cloaks. Blood of the root and kiss of the fire. Heat me gently, lift me higher. Take this thread and hold it true. Never let the color through. Historians still argue whether Viking Age dyers had such chance, or if that's just the romanticism of later centuries layered over truth like cheap lacquer. Either way, it helps you focus. And your batches don't streak anymore, so maybe there's something to it. You dip in a test thread, just a strand of pre-mordanted wool. You leave it for a count of 50, stirring slowly, watching the water wrap around it like a sleeping serpent. Then you lift it out. Red, not bright but strong. A warm, earthy tone somewhere between brick and dried blood. You smile. This is going to be a good batch. The apprentice brings over the full skeins and lines them up like offerings. You grab the first and submerge it carefully. The trick is to keep it moving, don't let it rest, or it'll dye unevenly. The wool dances beneath your paddle, soaking in the color like gossip. You hum to keep rhythm. After a few minutes, the first skein is done. You pull it out slowly, letting the steam rise in tendrils around your arms. The color glows in the firelight, deep, noble, timeless. You hang it on a branch to cool and set the next skein into the pot. There's a pause. A quiet one. Fire crackles. Wool simmers. Your apprentice for once does not ask a dumb question. You savor it. And then, can we dye something blue now? You glance sideways. The woad's still fermenting. Patience. He groans, flopping onto a bale of straw. This takes forever. You nod. And if you rush it, you get pink instead of red. Or worse, orange. I like orange. Orange is the color of defeat, you say gravely, and turn back to the pot. You continue cycling skeins in and out of the cauldron. Each one emerges slightly different, some darker, some warmer. That's part of the charm. No two pieces are the same. No batch repeats. If someone wants perfect consistency, they can go find a Roman factory and hope the centurions take fabric orders. Your hands ache. Your back complains. You ignore them both. This is the moment you live for the alchemy of it, the boiling chaos, the stink and the steam and the ancient art that somehow still works hundreds of years after the first person said, "I wonder what happens if I boil that root and dunk this." You finish the last skein and wipe your forehead with a sleeve that's already red with splashes. The apprentice hands you a cup of lukewarm cider. You take a sip and close your eyes. Around you, the dyed wool hangs like a curtain of flame, reds and russets, and smoldering oranges glowing in the afternoon sun. Smoke curls into the sky. Somewhere a sheep bleats as if to say, "Where's my fleece thief?" You chuckle. It's getting famous, that's where. And with that, you lean back against a post, letting the heat from the fire and the satisfaction of the dye settle into your bones. The wool has cooled, the dye pots are bubbling down to a gentle hiss, and now comes the stage where most people would assume you're done. But you know better. Dyeing is a drama queen. It needs a finale. And this part, the dipping, is both art and gamble. You carry the cooled skeins to the dye bench, a wide plank stretched between two tree stumps, stained with 100 past hues. Sunlight filters through the birch canopy above, flickering over the wool like a second layer of pigment. You lay the red skeins flat, admiring the variation. Some are deep and blood-rich, others tinged with rust or clay. Not uniform, but alive. Next, you prepare for the indigo, or at least what you hope will be indigo, because now it's time to deal with the woad vat. The vat sits in the dye hut like something you shouldn't touch without gloves and a curse breaker. It has been fermenting for days, a soup of crushed woad leaves, water ash, and that infamous special sauce of stale urine. It smells, well, let's say it announces itself before you even open the door. You slide the lid back and lean in. A thick greenish scum coats the surface, and the smell, sweet, sharp, and unmistakably aggressive, wraps around your face like a damp rag full of regrets. Perfect. You stir with your dedicated woad paddle. The liquid churns, releasing bubbles and a faint shimmer just beneath the surface. That shimmer is key. It means the pigment's floating in its invisible, colorless form, just waiting for oxygen to bring it to life. Your apprentice appears in the doorway holding a bundle of pre-mordanted wool and looking like he'd rather wrestle a troll than come any closer. It's time, you say solemnly. "I hate this part," he replies, nostrils flaring. Then hold your breath and be grateful you're not the one who has to explain this process at the next harvest feast. Historians still argue whether Viking dyers truly understood the chemical transformation of woad, or if they just stumbled into success by noticing that wool turned blue after they pulled it from the vat and it met the air. Either way, the process feels like magic. Rotten magic. But magic. You take the first skein, dunk it into the vat slowly. The trick is not to agitate too much. Too much air will ruin the batch too little and the color won't form. The wool disappears beneath the surface, soaking up nothing. It still looks gray when you pull it out. And then you wait. The color changes right before your eyes. Gray turns yellowish, then green. Then slowly, like a bruise blossoming in reverse, it shifts to blue. Real blue. That ancient, melancholic sky after a storm kind of blue. The apprentice gasps. It's happening. Of course it's happening. That's what we do, you say, but you're grinning. It never gets old. You hang the skein from a branch to oxidize and move on to the next. Dunk, lift, wait, watch the magic. Soon, you have a whole row of blues drying in the breeze. Some are dark as raven feathers, others lighter sea blue sky, blue sorrow blue. There's no such thing as a pure tone in this world. Everything depends on the mordant, the pH, the batch, the weather, the phase of the moon, maybe even your mood. You take a moment to breathe in, not through your nose, because that would be foolish, but metaphorically. The work, the colors, the sweat, the absurdity of fermenting plants, and pee to create art. It's all worth it when the blue sings. Your apprentice walks past the row, fingers trailing along the drying strands. This one looks like the fjord near my aunt's farm, he says. You nod. Good. That means it'll sell. You both sit on a low log watching the last skeins dry. The dye hut still stinks, the paddles are stained, and your hands are permanently tinted. Fingers, red wrists, blue nails that defy soap. You look like you lost a fight with a rainbow. Why do we do this? The apprentice finally asks, genuine this time. It's exhausting. It smells bad. We could be making barrels or axes. You look at the blue skeins, then the reds, then the glint of a future cloak catching sun through the trees. Because color matters, you say. To mark a chieftain, to wrap a newborn, to shroud the dead, to tell stories before they're spoken. Color is memory. He goes quiet for once. The fire burns low again. You rake the embers, toss in a branch, and let it snap. The wind picks up and rustles the drying wool, making it sway like a prayer banner. You wonder just for a moment if anyone will ever write about you. Not the kings, not the warriors, but the dyers. The ones who boiled roots and wrestled sheep to turn rough wool into something beautiful. Maybe. It's dipping time again, but now things are getting tense. The colors are set. The skeins are hanging like ghostly sausages all around the dye hut, and the apprentice is doing a pretty good impression of someone helpful. All good signs. Except now comes the part where you curse more than usual, layering the dyes. You've got a bundle of wool pre-dyed in that solid, earthy red from the madder bath earlier. Good, honest color, but you're after something richer today. A murky wine-dark overlay. Something that says this cloak belongs to someone who can both lead a feast and survive a duel. That means second dipping. In iron. You heat up the old cauldron again, just a low simmer. Not too hot, or the color goes flat. Not too cool, or it won't stick. Iron is picky like that. You swirl the water murky and metallic and whisper your usual half-joke prayer. Please don't turn my masterpiece into sludge. The apprentice hovers behind you, chewing a piece of flatbread with that slightly cow-like expression he reserves for when he doesn't understand something, but desperately wants credit. Are we making it darker? He asks, mouthful. You nod. We're making it deeper. Red is for passion. Add iron, and it's about power. He blinks. Like blood and swords. Like blood and swords after the fight. You grab a test strand and dip it gently into the iron bath. No splashing. You're not a blacksmith. The wool hisses faintly, like it's remembering something painful. When you lift it out, it's changed subtle, but sure. The bright red has dulled into something brooding, bruised, almost regal. Historians still argue whether Viking dyers intentionally layered dyes or if these effects were accidental byproducts of experimentation. Some textile samples suggest a surprising degree of control over color gradients and tones. Others look like someone spilled soup on a tunic and just went with it. You hang the test strand next to the others and nod. It's good. Looks like dried berries, your apprentice says. In a good way. You snort. Flattery won't get you out of rinsing duty. Next, you dip the actual skeins. One by one. No rushing. You hum while you work some nonsense tune about goats and clouds. It keeps your rhythm steady. The apprentice tries to join in and immediately goes off key, so you stop. Each skein soaks for just a minute or two, then gets lifted wrung and hung on the rack. As the wind dries them, the iron works its quiet magic. Color deepens, edges sharpen. Some parts even catch a faint metallic sheen in the light, like old armor left in the sun. You take a moment to look around. The dye yard now resembles a sorcerer's laundry day. Red strands, blue skeins, overdyed wine dark wool, a few sad test scraps you'll turn into mittens if they don't embarrass you. The scent in the air is part wood smoke, part iron, part fermented regret. But to you, it's the smell of success. Your apprentice stretches arms above his head. So are we done? You shake your head. Nope. Now we make sure it doesn't wash out in the rain. He groans. There's always another step. You grin. Welcome to dyeing. You fill a fresh basin with stream water and a splash of vinegar, your grandmother's fixative recipe sworn by and never questioned. You soak each skein briefly, give it a gentle squeeze, and hang it again. This rinse sets the final tone, neutralizes whatever minerals remain, and helps prevent the dreaded rain bleed, that terrible moment when your beautiful red tunic runs like strawberry jam in a thunderstorm. The apprentice watches you carefully. This time he doesn't interrupt, just takes mental notes as he always does when you're doing the parts that really matter. You respect that. He may be slow, but he's learning. And besides, you were just as bad at his age. Worse, maybe. You once boiled onion skins for 3 hours before realizing you'd forgotten the mordant. You still see the yellow stains in your nightmares. The sun dips lower now. The light turns golden, glinting off wet fibers and puddles on the packed earth. You sit back, stretch your legs, and let your hands rest in your lap. They ache. The kind of ache that feels earned. You think of trade days when merchants come sniffing around, fingering your yarn, asking about color fastness, weight hue, and whether this would look good on a jarl's wife. You think of those wide-eyed kids who peek into your booth, stunned that you made that royal blue or that bramble gray that looks like fog held captive. And you think about your own mother bent over the same bench, muttering the same prayers, stirring the same cauldrons, leaving fingerprints in every thread. You dip one last strand in the setting rinse, hold it up to the wind and smile. Color. Hard-earned, weird-smelling, and totally magical. You're not even halfway to done. And already you can feel the smell creeping into your soul. Not just your clothes, your being. It clings to the inside of your nose, nests in your hair, and weaves itself into your dreams like a persistent old song you can't shake. The stink of dye work, especially after a long day of boiling roots, rotting leaves, and reanimated buckets of human contributions, is no joke. You sniff the collar of your tunic cautiously. Yep, still terrible. I think I'm dying. Your apprentice groans from the dye hut's doorway, waving a piece of cloth in front of his nose like it'll help. Is this what ghosts smell like? You hold up a finger. No, ghosts smell better. The truth is, this smell is unavoidable. You've washed your hands in lye soap, scrubbed with ash, even tried wiping yourself down with juniper branches once. Nothing helps. You either learn to live with it or move to a career in bark tanning, which somehow smells worse. But for all its stench, the scent carries pride. It's the smell of colors that won't fade, of wool that holds its story of days spent turning dirt and weeds into robes worn by warlords and wanderers alike. Do I have to sleep in the barn again? Your apprentice asks mournfully, sniffing his armpit. You raise an eyebrow. You ever left the barn? He groans louder and throws himself into a pile of scrap fleece. You push open the dye hut's rickety door to let the fresh, or at least less offensive air in. The smoke drifts lazily across the clearing, blending with the already heady scent of hot metal, sour woad, and singed wool. You sigh and sit on the chopping stump you've been using as a stool since the real bench broke 2 years ago. The thing is, the smell is part of the job. No one talks about it in the sagas. They talk about brave men, epic battles, sea monsters, gold rings, and maybe one suspiciously magical sword. But nobody mentions that all those fine cloaks and banners probably reeked of fermented plant juice and urine-soaked wool for weeks. Historians still argue whether dyers had designated workwear tunics sacrificed to the dye gods and never allowed indoors. Some evidence suggests heavily stained garments worn primarily in dye houses, possibly even as a badge of honor. Others think Viking society didn't mind the smell so much, since everything back then smelled like goat anyway. You pull your boots off one at a time and give your feet a cautious whiff. Still bad. Less bad than yesterday, though. Improvement. The apprentice rolls over in the fleece pile, bits of fluff clinging to his eyebrows. Why can't we use flowers like normal people? Because flowers lie, you say, for what feels like the 100th time. They give you a pretty petal and a whisper of color, then vanish the second you wash it. We don't dye for show. We dye for storms and travel and funeral fires. Can't we just once make something that smells like honey? You shrug. We could try honey. He perks up. Really? But then the bees would come. His face falls. You pick up one of the drying skeins, a deep wine red from earlier, and run your fingers through it. It's dry enough now that you can begin the final quality check. You tug gently, feel the tension, the evenness of the twist, the weight in your hand. The smell doesn't go away, but your nose has mostly gone numb. You hand the skein to the apprentice. Sniff this. He eyes you warily. Why? Because if it smells too much like copper, we didn't rinse it long enough. He sniffs. His eyes water instantly. My ancestors just screamed at me. Then rinse it again. You throw him a bucket. He lurches to his feet and heads toward the stream, muttering something about dreams of being a swordsmith instead. You stretch your back, bones popping like old roof beams in the wind. The weight of the day settles in slowly, arms sore from stirring legs, stiff from chasing sheep, nose tired from existing. But this is the rhythm. Color is bought with effort. Stink is the cost of permanence. Later, when you take the wool to market, people will lean in, fingers stroking the threads, and say, "How did you get it this red?" They'll marvel. They'll offer coin. They'll ask if it's royal dye from the east. And you'll smile, knowing it came from your backyard, your sheep, your roots, and your utterly wrecked nostrils. You look at the skeins drying in the twilight, glowing faintly in the last orange rays of sun. Still worth it, you mutter, and reach for the mead flask under your bench. It's hard to say exactly when you stopped noticing the smell. Maybe it was around the time your socks began to hold a permanent vinegar tang, or when you caught yourself describing the scent of boiling madder root as kinda nice actually. Either way, it's in your blood, now part of your skin, your breath, your laundry, and probably your future ghost. But it's not just the wool that carries it. The hut, the tools, the cauldrons, the apprentice, everything smells faintly like a Viking witch's stew pot. And no matter how many times you rinse, soak, or sun-dry your supplies, the odor clings like gossip in a small village. Still, today's work isn't done. You've got a fresh batch of fleece to morden before tomorrow's woad dip, and that means another round with your least favorite cauldron, the one you only use for a loom because it always tips slightly to the left. You swear it does it on purpose. You drag the thing over the fire, fill it halfway with stream water, and start heating it up. The alum goes in next, dissolving into the rising steam with that faint, chalky scent you've come to associate with reliability. Your apprentice appears holding a half-dry skein in one hand and a concerned look in the other. The blues, patchy, he says, like it got shy halfway through. You set down the alum scoop. You stirred the vat right gently. I stirred something. You close your eyes. Please tell me it wasn't the sheep trough again. It might have been. You pinch the bridge of your nose and breathe deeply through your mouth. Fix it. Remorden, redip. No shortcuts this time. He nods sheepishly, pun unintended you hope, and scurries off trailing fibers like a mop with legs. You return to your vat. The water's steaming now, just the right temperature. You swirl the alum in slow circles, watching it disappear into the current. Then you reach for the fleece. It's a particularly soft batch today, fluffy, almost cloud-like. You suspect it came from Snorri, the grumpiest ram in your flock, whose fleece is oddly luxurious for someone so prone to headbutting fence posts. You lower it into the bath, gently letting it soak up the minerals like a sponge. The water shifts slightly as the wool absorbs it, turning faintly murky with hidden oils. You stir, slowly, rhythmically. You hum under your breath again, the same tuneless melody your mother used. She claimed it kept the wool calm, though in hindsight, that may have just been her way of drowning out the smell. Historians still argue whether certain Viking dyes were regionally guarded secrets or widely shared among trading villages. Some sagas suggest dyers were as respected as blacksmiths, artists of the thread. Others imply you were just the person with the strongest stomach and least social ambition. You like to think you're a little of both. The alum does its quiet work. No drama, no smell, just clean, effective chemical bonding. Honestly, you wish more parts of your life were this dependable. You finish the batch and lay the skeins out on the rack. The late sun glows gold through the fibers, making them look almost holy. Meanwhile, your apprentice returns with a bucket of woad that definitely contains more than just dye. Why is this so lumpy, you ask, eyeing it with suspicion. He peers in. Maybe protein. You're cleaning it, you say flatly with your hands. The apprentice looks at you, then at the vat, then slowly back at you. How much do you pay me again? You grin. I haven't decided yet. He trudges off, muttering about learning how to make arrows instead. You sit back against the dye shed wall, feeling the day settle into your muscles. The heat's dying down, both from the sun and the fire, and the wool is hanging quietly now, like flags marking a strange, colorful victory. The smell still lingers, of course. It always will. You can wash your tools, scrub your floors, boil your hands, but you can't undo a life spent in service to color. And honestly, you wouldn't want to. It's in your clothes, your home, your reputation. You're the one who makes warriors look like kings, who gives weavers their canvas, who stains fabric with history one stinking pot at a time. The apprentice shrieks as something bubbles violently in the vat. You raise your cup of mead unbothered. To scent and glory you whisper and drink. Peace like a properly dyed tunic never lasts long. You're sitting by the fire basking in the brief satisfaction of a successful dye batch when the quiet unravels. It starts with a rustling, then a bleat, then a second bleat that sounds suspiciously like laughter. You turn just in time to see two of your sheep, Froda the queen of escape artists, and her dim-witted sidekick, Leaf, slipping through a half-open gate and trotting directly into your neighbor's oat field. Of course they are. You hurl down your cup, muttering words that would make a Viking sailor blush, and take off in a limping sprint. Your boots squish in puddles of indigo runoff as you race past the dye racks, through the pasture, and toward the field, your apron flapping like a battle banner. Not again, you shout, as Froda prances delicately between stalks, munching like she's at a banquet. Leaf is already neck-deep in oats, looking thrilled to be included. Your apprentice appears behind you, panting. Should I help? Just close the gate before the rest get ideas. He turns and runs the other way. You climb the low fence and squelch into the field. Oats crackle under your boots as you advance, slowly, hands outstretched. Come on, Froda, don't make this another incident. She eyes you, then bolts. You dive, miss. You run, trip. You finally lunge and grab a fistful of fleece. Froda gives a half-hearted kick, but she's mostly resigned. You drag her back toward the fence tail, swishing indignantly. Leif follows, chewing a mouthful of something that does not belong in his stomach. As you march them back into the pasture, Freydis, your neighbor, appears at the edge of her yard, hands on hips expression, murderous. This is the third time this season, she says. They're just curious, you offer. They're eating my oats. You reach into your pocket, pull out a skein of red-dyed wool, and hand it over. Peace offering. She snatches it, sniffs it, and shrugs. Still smells like goats. That's how you know it's authentic. Historians still argue whether Viking sheep were truly penned or free-ranged on common land, but your daily life suggests they were mostly escape artists in wool suits. Fences were more of a suggestion than a rule, and once a sheep sets its sights on someone else's barley, nothing short of divine intervention will stop it. You finally corral Froda and Leaf back into their pen and slam the gate shut with a dramatic flourish. Your apron is soaked, your tunic is flecked with oat chaff, and your patience is sheared thinner than Snorri's fleece in midsummer. Your apprentice approaches cautiously, holding a bowl. I found some leftover stew. You eye the grayish slop and take it anyway. Thanks. Keep an eye on the gate. He salutes. Yes, master of color and sheep. You sit down hard on a bale of damp straw and dig into the stew. It's cold over salted, and you're pretty sure one of the carrots is actually a beet, but it's food, and that's all that matters. Over by the dye shed, the breeze lifts the drying skeins again. They dance like tiny flags, vibrant and full of meaning. Red for courage, blue for wisdom, gray for mourning, green for rebirth. At least, that's what people say. You've dyed so many colors, you start assigning personalities to them. The red from this morning, confident, bold, probably yells during feasts. The soft green from your lichen experiment, a quiet bookworm with too many secrets. The blue from the woad vat stoic, a little sad, maybe writes poetry about the sea. Color is character, and it's your job to coax it out of roots, rocks, and stink, then hope the sheep don't eat it. You lean back and watch the sun slide lower on the horizon. The dye day is winding down, but the flock is restless. Froda glares at you through the fence. You glare back. Tomorrow you'll try for yellow, maybe goldenrod. You've got a patch growing by the ridge if the goats haven't eaten it. Yellow's a tricky one, fades fast, burns bright, and always smells a little weird. But then again, don't we all? The village dye market always smells like ambition and cabbage. You're not sure why cabbage. No one here sells it, but the scent clings to the corners of the market square like a stubborn guest weaving itself between the sharper tangs of boiled woad, smoked fish-tanned leather, and the particular perfume of unwashed ambition. You arrive with a pack full of dyed skeins slung over your shoulder and a cart that squeaks in protest with every bump. Your apprentice trudges behind, dragging a sack of offcuts and second-quality yarn that you'll try to unload on someone's overly optimistic mother. You set up under your usual spot between the beekeeper with suspiciously muscular arms and the weaver who always glares at your color choices like you've personally offended her family. You begin the ritual. First, the hanging. Each skein goes up in a tidy row across the beam of your stall. Blues first, then reds, then the greenish ones that look amazing in moonlight, but oddly like pond scum in direct sun. You saved the experimental colors for last, the wine-dipped rust, the smoky gray violet, and the one that came out looking like a gooseberry with low self-esteem. Next comes the fluffing. You toss the skeins, gently let them catch the light. Give them that look of careless luxury that makes a noblewoman think she's stumbled onto something rare and expensive. You fluff with flair. You fluff with pride. And finally, the smiling. Gods help you, the smiling. Your first customer of the day is a broad-shouldered woman with a toddler on her hip and a mouthful of demands. She wants red, but not too red. Blue, but not sad blue. Something regal, but also something that hides goat milk stains. You hand her a skein you call Nightfire Ember and let her ooh and ah for a full minute before casually mentioning its limited stock. She buys 3. You wink at the toddler. Historians still argue whether Viking markets had fixed stalls or roamed seasonally. You tell your apprentice as he unpacks the change satchel, but one thing is certain, there have always been picky customers. He's about to respond when a man appears at the next stall, leaning over to inspect one of your indigo skeins. Did you use woad? He asks, sniffing it like it's wine. You nod. Fermented 5 days. Urine base, iron potted, first draw. He raises an eyebrow impressed. Nice sheen. You beam. Compliments from a fellow dyer are rare and precious, like finding a beetle that actually helps the color, instead of just ruining your day. The morning passes in a flurry of haggling, chatting, and the occasional polite duel over stall space. You trade a batch of smoky ochre for 2 wheels of goat cheese. You give a leftover green skein to the baker's daughter, who promises to weave it into a headband and definitely not turn it into puppet hair. You sell your last crimson coil to a traveling bard who insists the shade matches his loot case. Your apprentice handles most of the coin counting now. You've taught him the ancient art of not blinking during price negotiations, and he's become weirdly good at it. Either that, or his eyelids are just tired. The weaver next to you leans over as the day wears on. Your reds are bolder this year, she says, not quite accusingly. You nod. Madder root aged through winter. Cold makes it bitter. Bitter makes it strong. She grunts, then offers you a roll of undyed linen in exchange for a handful of your leftover yellow. You trade. Not because you need more linen, but because that's the game. Quiet competition, quiet cooperation. Everyone trying to outcolor everyone else while secretly hoping their neighbor succeeds enough to keep the market alive. You pause to take a swig from your water skin and watch the crowd pass by. Farmers, traders, travelers, the occasional wide-eyed child marveling at the rows of glowing thread. You always love that moment, the one where someone realizes that these colors don't come from a bottle or a shop. They come from you. From your roots, implants, and aching hands. And of course, from sheep. A familiar bleat cuts through the noise. You turn. There, trotting confidently between a bread cart and a barrel of fish, is Froda, covered in oat husks, chewing what appears to be your best purple skein. You leap the stall counter, sprinting across the square with a string of increasingly creative insults. The crowd parts with amusement. The apprentice hollers something about trying not to cause another cabbage incident. You tackle Froda near the well, retrieve the now slobbery wool, and drag her back by the horns like a very stubborn prize. The crowd applauds. You bow. Show's over, you mutter. Still, you can't help smiling as you return to your stall. The purple skein is salvageable. Probably. Froda curls up behind the table and starts chewing on your sandal instead. You don't stop her. You're too tired. As the sun sinks lower, you count your earnings. Enough for salt. Enough for that new pot you've had your eye on. Maybe even enough for a bottle of imported oil that smells like anything other than goat. You pack up, slowly looping your leftover skeins into bundles and wrapping them in linen. The apprentice handles the cart. Froda follows behind like a hairy shadow. Another market day done, another round of colors sent into the world. You smell like 12 kinds of dye and at least 3 kinds of regret. But as you trudge home through the dusk, you know it's all worth it. Tomorrow you dye again. Rain, of course it rains. You wake to the sound of it, soft at first like sheep chewing close to the tent flap, then harder, more insistent. A steady drum beat on the thatch roof growing louder with every passing moment. You sit up slowly stiff from yesterday's market haul and already know the drying racks. You fling open the door and sprint outside in nothing but your linen underlayer boots squelching through the mud as you skid into the dye yard. And there it is. The disaster. Wool, soaking. Red-dyed skeins now bleeding slightly at the edges, dripping rosy tears into the puddles below. Indigo skeins looking defiant but damp, their deep blue sheen dulled to a moody charcoal. One yellow coil has fallen off its hook and lies in a puddle like a drowned duck. You let out a sound somewhere between a sigh and a war cry. From the cottage behind you, your apprentice pokes his head out, blinking sleepily. Is it morning already? No, you growl. It's the gods testing us again. He shuffles over barefoot, slipping once in the slick grass and nearly braining himself on the firewood stack. You thrust a bundle of twine at him. Get these inside, start the fire, hang what you can from the rafters. You work together wordlessly for the next hour, wringing skeins, rescuing half-finished wool bundles, grumbling under your breath. The dye house transforms into a makeshift drying chamber with ropes strung across beams and hooks nailed hastily into door frames. Wool hangs from every available surface. Your home now looks like a colorful swamp monster exploded indoors. The air thickens quickly, warm, damp, musky. Everything smells like wet sheep, wet wood, wet ambition. You stand in the doorway, drenched from the knees down, and just stare at the mess. Why does it always rain the day after market? The apprentice, now huddled near the hearth, shrugs. Maybe Odin hates wool. You sigh and start peeling off your soggy tunic. At least it's not snow. You pause, knock on the nearest beam for luck, loudly. Historians still argue whether Viking dyers had waterproof shelters for drying wool or simply gambled on good weather. Given the sudden downpours and the precariousness of medieval construction, the answer is likely they tried and often failed. You hang your boots near the fire and grab the drying stick, a long pole used to fluff and rotate skeins without smudging the dye. You poke the nearest red skein and sigh. It's not ruined, but it's sulking. There's always something to do. So you get to it. You pull out your notes, the leather-bound bundle of scraps stitched together from old trade ledgers, meat wrapping, and a few sacrificial goatskins. Inside are your dye recipes, observations, tiny sketches of sheep with commentary like, "Do not trust this one." You flip to the rain chapter. Yes, you've written one. Rain recovery methods complete with diagrams and curses in 3 languages. You consult it like a monk paging through scripture. Add heat. Add salt. Redip if color fades. Air dry upside down for blues. Avoid direct fire contact, or you'll end up with singed skeins and smoky tunics no one wants to wear. You bark out orders to the apprentice, who is now using a towel as a cape and calling himself the wool wizard. Cape off, wizard. Get the bellows going. You reheat the iron pot carefully. No full submersions this time, just a quick hot rinse to tighten the color back into the skeins that bled the most. One by one, you dip and lift, dip and lift. Your hands go from damp to wrinkled to completely numb. The fire hisses as rainwater drips from the rafters into the coals. You slide a bucket beneath the leak and keep going. Outside, the rain eases into a drizzle. Gray light seeps through the windows, washing everything in a gloomy hue. But inside, your dye house glows. Reds shimmer again. Blues regain their depth. Even that poor yellow sky fluffs up a little under your hand, no longer looking like it's given up on life. Your apprentice tiptoes around the drying lines, careful not to jostle the ropes. What happens if it rains again tomorrow? We sacrifice a goat, you mutter, or a weaver, I'm flexible. He snorts and returns to stoking the fire. You watch the wool sway slightly above your head, breathing in the thick stew of wet dye smoke and singed bark. The smell, awful as it is, brings a weird sort of calm. You've been through worse, like the time a squirrel fell into the woad vat and turned half your stock grayish-brown. Or the week your partner tried brewing beer in the same hut and everything came out smelling like stale bread for months. This just a little rain. You sit back, sip mead from a chipped mug, and smile grimly. Let the gods test us, you say aloud. We're dyers, we adapt. From the rafters above, a single droplet falls directly onto your nose. You don't react, because of course it does. You're drying wool over a fire and trying not to panic when the red skein closest to the flame starts to steam, not gently, but like a boiling stew. You lunge forward, yank it down just in time, and blow on it like it's a birthday candle made of angry fiber. Your apprentice looks up from his seat beside the hearth where he's carving a stick into what might be a spoon or a very sad bird. Did we just almost burn down the whole cottage again? You nod winded, but the wool would have been warm and crispy. Crunchy cloaks, he says, nodding sagely. New fashion. You both laugh, though it's mostly nerves. There's a reason you don't let fire and fiber flirt too long. Wool, when scorched, doesn't just blacken, it smells like wet hair and betrayal. You still remember the infamous midwinter cloak incident when a misjudged ember turned 5 days of dye work into a pile of smoky regret. So lesson revisited, low fire, high vigilance. You readjust the rack and retreat to your bench, cradling the salvaged skein like a child. The color survived barely. A little duller maybe, but with the kind of patina you could market as smoke-aged. People love words like that. Makes it sound intentional. Your apprentice leans over. You ever think of quitting? Every single time I ruin a batch of purple. Why don't you? You hold up the skein, still warm, still stubbornly red, because no one else makes this color, out of beetle's piss and bad luck. He nods slowly. Fair. The thing is, there's always something to go wrong in this job. Maybe your mordant was weak. Maybe your wool was still oily. Maybe the sun hid behind clouds and refused to set the color right. Or maybe, just maybe, a goat sneezed into your cauldron at the exact worst moment, and then it's ruined. Poof! Days of prep wasted. But once in a great while, it all works. The plants sing, the dye sticks, the wind stays kind. And what comes out of the vat isn't just colored thread, it's something ancient alive. Like you've channeled every Viking saga through a boiling pot and tied it into yarn. You live for those moments. Outside, the rain has tapered off. A soft drizzle now, the kind that gently ruins your drying wool instead of aggressively assaulting it. You decide to take a risk. You and the apprentice sling the dryer rack between two poles on the porch where the eaves give just enough coverage to catch the breeze without catching more rain. You rehang the skeins with clothespins carved from split pine, primitive sure, but they've held through worse. One by one, the wool takes to the air again, this time with a dignity hard-earned by fire flood and sheep. The apprentice stands beside you squinting. They look better after the rain. They always do, you murmur, stronger. Historians still argue whether Viking dyers used post-dye treatments beyond mordanting methods to soften, preserve, or weatherproof finished wool. Some suggest oils or fats were applied. Others believe simple repeated rinsing and airing out did the trick. You've tried all of them and still swear by sunlight and patience. Back inside, the fire crackles politely now. The cauldrons are empty. The tools rest. The stink clings, but it's familiar. It's the scent of labor. The apprentice disappears briefly and returns with 2 wooden bowls. Inside, leftover barley porridge, barely warm, and a slab of salted fish. Not exactly a feast, but it's calories. You eat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence shared only by people who've hauled buckets of urine in the rain together. Then the apprentice looks up. I had a dream last night. Gods help us. No, really. You were wearing a green tunic and there were birds in your beard. They were singing. You pause mid-bite. What was the dream about? He shrugs. Dunno, but I think it means you should dye something green next. You consider it. You have been meaning to test that lichen batch from the northern ridge, and someone at the last market asked for a spring color. Something soft, something strange. Maybe you say, maybe we'll try tomorrow. The apprentice smiles, then immediately drops his spoon and curses at the dog who has stolen the fish. You lean back, bowl in hand, and let your eyes drift over the wool, swaying gently in the doorway. Red-blue rust smoke, a rainbow of sweat and accidents. You think again about quitting, about laying down the paddle, growing turnips instead, or moving to the fjord and becoming one of those hermits who only speaks in riddles. But then one of the red skeins catches the light just right, glowing like coals under a winter sky, and you remember. You were born for this. You wake before dawn as usual, but this morning the air feels different. There's a dry crispness to it, a hint of wind from the north, and the unmistakable scent of possibility, plus the faint smell of wet dog. The latter is because your apprentice forgot to shut the door again, and now the sheepdog is curled up by the hearth, snoring like a broken bellows. You roll your shoulders, and tiptoe around the dog to peek outside. Clear skies. Blessed, rare, glorious clear skies. You grin like a man who's just found a gold coin in his turnip stew. Today, the drying can happen properly. Sun breeze and enough light to finish what the rain nearly ruined. You throw on your work tunic, which still smells like copper and regret, and head outside. The skeins hanging on the porch are half dry, stiff in places, but holding their colors. The red has deepened to a rusty garnet. The blue still pulses like sea glass, and the over-dyed bundles red dipped in iron now look like something a noble might wear to a duel and a funeral. You begin moving everything to the main rack, the big one near the goat fence that gets sun from morning until late afternoon. It's rickety patched with driftwood and permanently leaning, but it's your finest drying tool. The apprentice appears moments later clutching a bowl of something that might be porridge or just last night's stew with oats sprinkled on top. Clear day, he mumbles. Clear day, you nod. Time to try the purple again. He groans. Purple never works. Exactly why we keep trying. See, purple is the prize, the color of kings, of bishops, of egos too big for their own necklines. But purple is also fussy, rare, expensive, usually made from crushed sea snails that you checked do not have access to. But there are other ways. Riskier, yes, but also cheaper and considerably less fishy. You've been fermenting a new batch using elderberry's madder residue and a dash of sheep urine for complexity. It smells like failure, but it looks promising inky with a sheen of blue oil swirling on the surface. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly had access to true purple dyes, or whether they relied on layering reds and blues, or coaxed odd purples from regional plants and luck. The records are scarce, the guesses are many, and you're determined to be one of the better guesses. You stir the pot slowly, watching the mixture swirl like a bog in a storm. It's thick, dark, almost dignified. You dip in a test thread, something small, a scrap from the batch you ruined last week. It emerges murky, not quite purple, not quite anything. A disappointing bruise, if you're being honest. You sigh. The apprentice leans in. Looks like regret. Looks like potential, you reply, but your voice isn't exactly brimming with conviction. You let the skein sit hanging from a nail while you retreat to your notes. There must be something missing. Maybe it needs copper mordant. Maybe ash instead of vinegar. Maybe the problem isn't the ingredients, but the moon. You flip through your journal past old recipes with dramatic titles like Winterblood and Stormborn Gray, and definitely not what I intended, but it's pretty. Then it hits you. Logwood. You bought a sliver of it moons ago from a traveler passing through a bark scrap from a distant land that dyes deep violet, but is notoriously temperamental. You tucked it away for a day just like this. You fetch it from your secret stash, a carved wooden box buried beneath sheep shears, dried herbs, and one suspiciously sticky apple core. The bark is dry and brittle, but the color, oh, the color, deep plum even in the slivered edge. You grind it gently with your mortar, mixing it with the elderberry sludge and adding a splash of vinegar for luck. The cauldron hisses in approval. Try again, you mutter. You dip another skein. This time, as it rises from the vat, the color blooms slowly dark violet, edging toward wine with that unmistakable hint of majesty. You hold your breath. You hang it carefully. You wait. As the sun hits it, the color holds. You blink, then grin. By Thor's hammer, we've got it. The apprentice rushes over. It's purple. It's actual purple. He throws his arms in the air like you've just defeated a dragon. You both stand there, arms crossed, admiring the skein like proud parents. It's not a deep Tyrian purple, no crushed sea snails here, but it's real, rich, bold. The kind of color that people at the market will fight over with quiet smiles and loudly jingling coin purses. You let the other skeins soak while you prep more fiber for dipping. The air fills with the scent of barkberries, vinegar, and triumph. By noon, you have 5 perfect purple skeins drying on the main rack, catching sunlight and whispering royalty. The apprentice is already crafting a sales pitch. I'm going to call it witch-made wine, he says. You snort. You'll terrify the children. They'll buy 2 just to impress their friends. You let him have it. Today, he's right. You know the day's been successful when even the dog starts avoiding the dye racks. It's mid-afternoon now, and the courtyard smells like every forest bog and berry patch in Scandinavia rolled into one steaming pot. The colors drying in the breeze are nothing short of a saga red, like shield blood blue like twilight fjords, and now purple that hums with silent authority. You sit on the porch steps, a mug of lukewarm elderflower tea in hand, and just breathe. Not too deeply, of course. There's still that undertone of vinegar and mystery berries wafting from the purple vat, but still peaceful. The apprentice is nowhere to be seen, which means he's either napping under a fleece pile again or trying to barter leftover skeins with the fishmonger's daughter, who's recently discovered an interest in fashion. You'll let him have the illusion of courtship for now. It'll keep him motivated through the next woad fermentation cycle. You take a moment to catalog your inventory. 9 red skeins check. 5 purples still drying, but solid. 7 blues vibrant, if slightly uneven. 2 browns, one of which might have been a failed attempt at moss green. You'll rebrand it as Marsh Dusk and see if anyone notices. 3 undyed but mordanted skeins hanging near the back, just waiting for the next stroke of inspiration. Your gaze shifts to a bucket of goldenrod flowers drying in the sun next to a bowl of crushed walnuts. A yellow and brown combination, it could work. Something autumnal, something that whispers about the woods rather than shouting. But then there's movement on the ridge path, a blur of red wool and muddy boots. You squint. It's Carrie, the trader's cousin. She's fast walking in your direction with purpose, which is never a good sign. You stand brushing crumbs from your lap and intercept her halfway. They say your blue ran on Bjorn's cloak, she announces without preamble. You blink. Which blue? She squints. The blue. Bjorn has 2 cloaks, you say. One was woad-dyed last year. The other he bought from that man in the traveling cart with suspicious eyebrows. She crosses her arms. It smelled like yours. You sigh. So do I. Doesn't mean we're related. Carrie cracks a smile, but just barely. He wants a refund. Tell him to stop standing in the rain and learn how to rinse wool properly. My dye holds. The man bathes like a seal. She nods satisfied. I'll tell him that. Tell him gently. You exchange a few more pleasantries, then she's off again, hair bouncing, boots squelching. Another satisfied almost customer. Historians still argue whether dyed wool was considered luxury in all Viking settlements, or if rural folk just stuck to natural fleece colors. But evidence suggests everyone, rich or poor, wanted a bit of color when they could get it. Even Bjorn, bless his soggy soul. Back at the dye shed, you turn your attention to the wool, still soaking in the elderberry logwood purple vat. You give it one last stir, watching the fibers shimmer under the surface. It's thick now, like soup left too long on the fire. Time to pull them out. One by one, you lift the skeins from the pot. They steam in the afternoon sun, dripping plum-colored droplets onto the stone floor. You hang them, carefully spacing them just enough to keep the colors from kissing. They're not dry yet, but the hue is holding stable regal, almost smug. You sit down again more cautiously this time and take another sip of tea. Your apprentice returns an hour later, cheeks flushed and smelling faintly of trout. Don't ask, he says, before you can. You gesture to the purple. It's done. He stares at it like he's seeing fire for the first time. It's even better than this morning. You nod, because I didn't let you touch it. He grins. He's earned it. As evening falls, you gather the dry skeins into neat rolls, tie them with twine, and lay them out on the prep table. Tomorrow, you'll sort them by shade and prepare the merchant orders. Maybe even label a few. Battle Rose, Twilight Vine, Storm-Dyed Honor. Nonsense names, sure, but they sell. You sit beside your apprentice near the fire, letting the day's heat seep out of your bones. The wind is cool, the sky streaked in gold and blue, and something between them exactly the color you hope to recreate next. I still can't believe we made that purple, your apprentice murmurs. You helped, you say, because it's true, even if it was mostly by not helping during the critical moments. He leans back and stares at the darkening sky. Think the gods wear dyed wool. You grin, only if they've got good taste. The fire crackles, the wool sways in the breeze. The whole world smells like berries, bark sheep, and firelight. You close your eyes content. There's something sacred about the quiet after a dye day. Not silence exactly. Your apprentice is still snoring softly by the hearth, and the dog occasionally grunts in his sleep like he's chasing rebellious sheep. But quiet, the kind that settles in your chest, slow and warm like honey left too long in the sun. You lie back on your makeshift bench bed, wrapped in a cloak that smells like smoke sheep and the faintest trace of elderberry dye. Your fingers are sore knuckles stained purple at the creases, nails blackened at the edges. But that's how you know the color's good, when it gets under the skin. Outside, the moon casts silver across the drying rack. Even in the dark, the purples shine. You think of how far those skeins will travel across valleys, into hands that will never know your name, but will wear your labor all the same. It's easy to forget sometimes that your work isn't just wool. It's signal, it's symbol, it's survival. You hear a creak, then footsteps. The apprentice, wrapped in a half-finished woolen throw, steps out into the doorway, blinking sleep from his eyes. I had a dream, he mumbles. Was it about talking sheep again? No, this one was weirder. He sits beside you on the bench, staring up at the stars. I was standing in front of a longboat. Huge thing, painted red and gold. But instead of shields, the sides were draped in dyed wool, blue, green, purple. It was glowing, like it was alive. You say nothing. And then the ship took off into the sky. He glances at you. You think that means something. You nod slowly. It means you've been breathing too many dye fumes. He laughs, a quiet, bubbling sound that doesn't wake the dog. Then silence again, real this time. You think of boats, though, real ones. You've dyed sails before, great coarse ones that soaked up more indigo than a cauldron should survive. The merchant who bought them said they scared off pirates. You don't know if that's true. Maybe pirates just hate the color blue. Or maybe a sail like that made the ship look like something cursed or blessed. Historians still argue whether dyed sails were common or rare, symbolic or functional. You think it's probably all of the above. People don't color things unless they want to be seen or remembered. You ever think of leaving your apprentice, asks suddenly, going, I don't know, somewhere warm, where the dye doesn't freeze in the pot before you can stir it. You exhale slowly, watching your breath cloud in the cold. Sometimes you admit, but who'd make the colors? He looks thoughtful. I would. You chuckle. That's so. Well, eventually, probably, after another 5 or 6 years. Try 10. You both sit side by side, wrapped in wool and thought. The night settles like a dye bath, left to steep quiet, layered, rich. Every creak of wood, every hiss from the hearth, every flap of wool in the breeze feels earned. And in this moment, you remember that color isn't just about beauty. It's about permanence. You dye not because it's easy or profitable or particularly glamorous. You dye because it lasts. When the fire goes out and the market's empty and the sheep have wandered back to wherever chaos is born, you'll still have the wool, still have the red, still have the purple that came from madness and logwood and prayer. The apprentice leans his head on the post beside him, already drifting again. You shift your weight so he doesn't fall off the bench. In the distance, an owl calls. The wool stirs once more on the rack. The dye sets quietly in the night. And tomorrow you'll try green again. Morning sneaks in like a thief, quiet and gray, sliding under the door, slipping across the rafters, gently nudging the side of your face with a cold breeze that smells like moss and wet stone. You blink your eyes open and, for a moment, forget where you are. Then you inhale, deeply. Ah yes, right, still a Dyer. You sit up slowly, pulling your cloak tighter. The The fire's burned down to ash and a few glowing coals. The apprentice is curled up on the floor beneath a heap of scrap fleece like a nesting bird. The dog is upside down, legs in the air, snoring like thunder. You rise, stretch, and step outside. And there it is again, that rare, glorious sight, perfectly dried wool swaying gently in the breeze. The purple skeins are rich and steady, no fading, no bleeding. The reds have darkened slightly, overnight, mellowed into something warm and wise. Even the blue, your most temperamental friend, has held true. You take them down one by one, folding each skein like a sacred scroll. This part always feels ceremonial. The wool has journeyed through root and fire and rain and smoke. It's ready now. You can feel it in your fingertips. You spread out the bundles on the workbench, sorting by hue, tying with rough-spun string. You pause over one of the purple skeins, the one that turned out slightly darker than the others. Something about it calls to you. You hold it up to the morning light. Not royal, not violet, something else entirely. Something like twilight before a storm. You dub it Shadowberry on the spot and chuckle to yourself. The apprentice stumbles out yawning. You naming wool again. I name what I respect. He squints. You ever name me? You tilt your head. Haven't found the right shade yet. He snorts and begins sweeping the dye hut floor, a cloud of dust and bark, an unnameable fuzz rising with each stroke. You get to work prepping the final bundles for trade. Not for market, today's different. Today, the trader from the Western Isles arrives, the one who always pays in silver salt and gossip. She's got the kind of reputation that makes people straighten their cloaks when she walks by. And she loves color. You hear her before you see her boots on gravel, the creak of her cart, and a voice that carries like she's talking through a long ship horn. You better not have wasted my time this year, color man. You grin. Never. She strides into the courtyard, her braid longer than most fishing nets, and her cloak stitched with patterns you don't recognize. I want 5 blues, she says, 2 reds, and something new, something dramatic. You gesture to the table. She inspects the goods like a raven sizing up a shiny trinket. Her fingers are calloused but careful. She stops over the Shadowberry skein. This one, she says. What's it called? You pause, then say, it hasn't told me yet. She laughs low and approving. Good answer, I'll take it. You negotiate quickly, like always, some coin, a pouch of dried apples, and a sack of salt that weighs more than your apprentice. She loads the wool into her cart, drops a wink, and rolls out with a shout of thanks over her shoulder. The apprentice watches her go. She scares me. She should. You store the rest of the wool in the back, carefully layering it in bundles of linen and straw. Not all will sell this week. Some will go by boat, some by horseback. Some you'll keep to weave into cloaks for the coldest days or gift to neighbors who remember your birthday without being reminded. As you close the storehouse door, a thought hits you. A simple one. You've done good work. Not perfect, not easy, but good. You sit with the apprentice at the fire again that night, your hands finally still your mind quiet. He turns to you after a long silence. Do you ever miss not doing this? You consider it. No, you say, but I do miss not knowing how hard it would be. He laughs. So do I. The fire crackles, the sky darkens, and the world narrows down to warmth and rest and the scent of dye clinging to everything you own. Your wool is safe. Your vats are clean. Your hands, though stained forever, feel lighter. You think maybe tomorrow you'll finally try that lichen batch from the ridge. Green's been waiting long enough. The next morning begins not with sheep bleating or dye vats bubbling, but with your own stomach growling like a cave bear in spring. You sit up and immediately regret not stuffing your boots with wool. Your toes feel like they've been politely frozen overnight. Your apprentice, already awake, a rare and unsettling event, pokes his head into the dye hut. There's bread and something pretending to be butter. You grumble but rise. Breakfast is rough-cut rye slices and a pat of something that might be goat milk churned by accident. Still, it's warm and filling, and as you eat, your gaze drifts toward the ridge. The lichen patch. You've been talking about it for days. You going to do it? The apprentice asks around a mouthful of bread. You nod. If the goats haven't eaten it yet. An hour later, you're halfway up the slope with a woven basket in one hand and your walking stick in the other. The path is steep, the rocks slick with early dew, but the air is clean and charged with the kind of energy that only comes when you're looking for something old, wild, and maybe useful. Lichen is not glamorous. It grows in crusty, irregular patches on old rocks and tree bark. But the right kind, especially Parmelia saxatilis if you're lucky, can yield the softest moss green or even a dusky purple if fermented the right way. The trick is knowing which clump is magic and which is just colorful disappointment. You reach the ridge, breath puffing out in little clouds, and scan the stone. There low on the north-facing side, a promising patch. Blue-green crust with orange fuzz near the edges. You kneel, pry a few flakes free with your knife, and sniff. Earthy, sharp, slightly peppery. You smile. You'll do. You fill your basket slowly, carefully, murmuring to yourself as you go. It's quiet up here. No sheep, no smoke, no apprentice dropping things. Just wind and rock and tiny explosions of stubborn color growing where no one thinks to look. Historians still argue whether Viking-age dyers foraged their own lichen or traded for it. Some sources suggest they treated certain lichen batches as family secrets, passing them down like treasure maps. Others think the best lichen was gathered during long ship journeys, scraped off coastal cliffs during supply stops. Either way, it was precious, powerful, and unpredictable. You return by midday, the basket full, your boots mud-caked, and your knees unhappy. Back at the dye hut, your apprentice eyes the basket. That's it. Looks like crumbs. You smirk. That's because you don't know what treasure looks like. You sort the lichen, some for fresh use, some for fermenting later. You set up a small clay jar with stale urine, of course, a splash of wood ash, and a few drops of vinegar. Then you layer in the flakes, seal it loosely, and mark the lid with a rune your grandmother insisted would keep the color inside. You're not sure it works, but the habit's comforting. Then comes the direct dye batch. A simple simmer, no fermenting, just heat and patience. The cauldron bubbles gently steam, rising in fragrant clouds of bark dust and mystery. You dip a test skein, undyed, pre-mordanted wool with a clean finish. You leave it in for a full hour, stirring every few minutes, watching as the water shifts from pale gray to something more olive. Not vibrant, but honest. You like honest. You hang the skein to dry. The apprentice leans in. Looks like tree bark. Good tree bark, you say. The kind with stories in it. He nods. What do we call it? You consider forest memory. He writes it down on a tag with surprisingly neat handwriting. The day slows after that. You brew tea from the leftover elderflowers, clean the tools, sharpen the shears. The dog stretches out in a sunbeam like a very content rug. The lichen jar starts to smell faintly like pickled mushrooms and ash. Promising. Later that evening, just as the sun touches the treetops, you check the dry skein again. The color is soft now, muted green like fog caught in pine needles. You run your fingers through the threads. It's not bold, it's not flashy, but it's real. A traveling bard might overlook it, but a spinner with a good eye will nod in approval. The apprentice comes up behind you, hands still damp from scrubbing pots. So worth the climb. You hold up the skein. Definitely. He squints. Still looks like moss. Then we've done our job. Because that's what the job is. Not just bright colors and flashy purples, but memory, mood, something ancient scraped from stone, boiled in hope, and hung to dry on a crooked rack behind your shed. Color that feels like the world. The next day begins with a knock, not the polite kind, but the urgent kind, like someone kicking the door with the specific rhythm of open now, or I'll huff and puff and take your best skein. You open it mid-chew crumbs in your beard and find yourself face to face with a wide-eyed boy holding something bundled in linen. From the chief's hall he blurts, "Urgent." You blink the sleep from your eyes. They finally realized gray tunics are depressing. He doesn't laugh. Instead, he thrusts the bundle into your arms and scampers off, tripping over the dog on his way down the hill. You close the door, set the bundle on the table, and untie it. Inside, a bolt of undyed wool, fine quality, tighter weave than usual, and a note scrawled in a hand so sloppy it could have been written by a goat. Need 10 skeins for Chief's new cloak. Deep green, impressive, before the solstice feast. Or else, signed Sif. You sigh long and theatrical. Sif the hall steward always makes demands with the energy of a crashing longship and the finesse of a stampeding elk. But still cloakwork. Important cloakwork. Cloak of a chief work. You whistle low. Apprentice, you shout, mouth full of cold bread. Get up. You're dying for royalty. From the back room, a groan. Already died yesterday. Then die better today. You start your plan. Deep green. That's the challenge. Not leaf green, not lichen green, not the kind of washed-out garden green that says, I grow turnips and resent my life. You need a cloak green, one that stands proud in firelight and doesn't shrink behind fur trim. You pace in your boots thinking, what about weld and woad your apprentice offers, finally staggering in hair sticking out like a startled dandelion? You nod. Good, layer them. Bright yellow base from weld, then a quick woad dip. If it works, we'll get green that doesn't look like soup. The apprentice blinks. If it doesn't. Tell Sif it's modern. You get to work. First, mordanting. You take a clean skein, soak it in alum, and let it rest while you stoke the fire and grind the weld flowers dry, crumbly, gold bright, even in dust form. You mix them into a pot of boiling water until the liquid shines like sunlight through ale. The smell is strange, peppery, almost grassy, but bearable. You dunk the skein, slowly, carefully, letting it soak, swirling it with the stick you've started calling the painter's spear. You hum to yourself while the apprentice preps the woad vat, a fresh batch that's just begun to reek properly. The yellow skein comes out bright, almost too bright, like someone tried to weaponize joy. Don't worry, you mutter. We'll knock the smug out of it with blue. Into the woad it goes. Not long, just a dip, then out. You and the apprentice hover over it, watching as the yellow surrenders. Not fully. Just enough. The result. Green, deep, rich, and oddly smug. Exactly what you needed. Historians still argue whether Vikings intentionally layered dyes for complex shades or stumbled into them by accident. Some surviving textiles show sophisticated color work, likely achieved through layering weld woad and madder. Others suggest single dye use with added mordant tweaks. As usual, it probably depended on time budget and whether the sheep cooperated. You repeat the process again and again, working quickly, carefully, rhythmically. Yellow, ring, dip, blue, air. The yard fills with skeins of drying green, each one slightly different, some like pine, others like moss, one like envy given thread. The apprentice fans them with a woven mat while you prep the note. 10 skeins deep green. Chief will look like a forest storm. You're welcome. Dyer. You bundle the wool in linen, stitch it with a few spare runes for luck, and send the apprentice down the hill with the package in a borrowed cart. You don't expect a reply. But 2 hours later, the same boy is back, panting, red-faced, and holding a small pouch. You open it, 5 silver coins and a polished amber bead shaped like a wolf's eye. No note, no complaints. You smile. That means they liked it. You lean back in your chair, aching and sweaty but satisfied. The dog curls around your boots. The apprentice collapses on a pile of fleece and starts snoring immediately. You look at your hands, green-streaked, calloused, trembling slightly. You rub them together and exhale. That's what it's about. Not the coins. Not even the recognition. But the moment when someone sees your color and chooses it. Tomorrow you'll rest. Maybe. They arrive just after breakfast, 5 of them stomping up the path with wet boots, matching tunics, and the unmistakable scent of fish mead and misplaced confidence. You know the type. You've met them before. Battle reenactors. One of them tall, burly, with a beard that looks like it was glued on in a rush steps forward. We heard you're the best dyer in the region. You nod. Depends what region you mean, and what your standards are. He thrusts out a rolled sheepskin. We want historically accurate tunics, brown, authentic brown, for a battle reenactment next month. The Siege of Thorn Hill. You blink. That was a real siege. They all nod solemnly. You resist the urge to ask who won. They unroll the sheepskin. Inside are swatches of wool in varying shades of brown, some reddish, some gray. One looks like the color of damp clay and self-loathing. We want it just like this, the leader says, jabbing a calloused finger at the most boring swatch of all. You pick it up. This isn't even dyed. This is just sheep. He nods, exactly. You inhale slowly through your nose. So you're asking me to make brown wool. Browner. He nods again, but in an accurate way. The apprentice appears behind you, eyes wide with panic. Do we even have enough brown left? You sigh. We always have enough brown. Because of course you do. Brown is everywhere. It's what happens when you mix red and green, yellow and blue dreams and reality, the color of dirt bark, practicality, and compromise. But these reenactors don't want rich walnut or golden chestnut. They want drab. They want early winter in a muddy field, while your boots are leaking brown. You start the cauldrons. You mix madder with iron to mute it. You toss in walnut hulls from last autumn and stir, slowly watching the water turn a kind of reluctant rust. Then you steep birch bark until it surrenders a soft, sleepy beige. You even pull out that one pot of oversteeped weld you'd sworn to throw away, but never did. The apprentice watches you fascinated. This is like anti-color. Exactly, this is restraint, this is subtlety, this is the color of losing a sword fight in the mud. Historians still argue whether most Viking tunics were dyed in muted tones, or if that's just modern projection. While natural browns and grays were common, some evidence points to vibrant hues, even among average folk likely dyed at home with local plants. But for every bright red, there was a tunic the color of despair stew. You dip the skeins one by one, let them steep. You pull them out and watch as the color dries to just the right hue of melancholy. You even make one slightly uneven on purpose. Authenticity, after all. The reenactors hover, inspecting every thread. This one's too lively, one says. You dunk it back in the iron pot without a word. By mid-afternoon, they're satisfied. You bundle the skeins and hand them over. They pay in coin and smoked fish. The apprentice pockets the coins. The dog eats the fish. As they march away, you can't help muttering, "No one dies like we do." The apprentice laughs. "We should put that on a sign." You head back into the hut, arm-stained patience frayed but proud in a weird, specific way. Because even the blandest brown has to be made. Thought through, stirred, not shaken. You flop onto a pile of fleece and close your eyes. The apprentice nudges you. Tomorrow. Yellow. You groan. Maybe something less tragic, he suggests. You wave him off, one thing at a time. For today you dyed brown so well it moved 5 grown men to silence. And that, oddly enough, is a victory. Of course, the day you finally plan to rest is the day the rain comes back. Not a storm, just that cold, drippy, indecisive sort of weather that can't make up its mind between mist and drizzle. The sky hangs low and gray, like it's been dipped in your most boring batch of lichen dye. You sit under the awning, watching the skeins sway in damp disapproval, and sip tea that tastes like regret and half-dried herbs. It's not even warm enough to fog the cup. The apprentice shuffles over wrapped in a half-finished cloak. Rain again. I noticed you mutter. He holds up a skein from yesterday's batch, a yellow so soft it almost looks white in the cloudy light. Still good. You nod. If it dries before mold moves in. He flips the wool over his shoulder dramatically. Then what now? You pause. What now, indeed? No dyeing today. No drying. The vats are scrubbed, the cauldrons clean, the sheep are blessedly still in their pen. So you do the only thing a dyer can do on a rainy, non-dyeing day. You sort. You haul out the big basket, the one that's lived in the corner so long it has its own dust ecosystem. Inside every scrap you couldn't bring yourself to throw out. Half-colored yarn, dye-stained rags, test swatches that never became anything more than conversations with pigment. Tangled messes. Miracles that came out of bad ideas that came out of desperate nights and overly fermented woad. The apprentice peers over your shoulder. Is that the seaweed experiment? You hold up the offending yarn, a greenish thread that smells faintly of salt and disappointment. Yep. He grimaces, still cursed. Debatable. You keep sorting. One by one you tug out odd colors, pile them by shade. The almost purple pile. The why is this orange pile. The let's never speak of this again pile. And then, beneath a coil of faded weld yellow, you find it. The black. Or rather, the thing that was almost black. A single skein. Dyed with iron and oak gall, and who knows what else it came out so dark it scared your apprentice into thinking the cauldron was bottomless. You tucked it away months ago, thinking it too uneven to use. Now, in the muted gray light, it looks magnificent, smoky with purple undertones, like the sky before a proper storm. The apprentice leans in. That's beautiful. You nod slowly. I know. He whispers. What do we call it? You smile. Raven breath. He gasps as if the name alone has power. You set it aside with reverence, suddenly rethinking the tunic you've been planning for winter. Maybe this skeins going into it. Maybe it becomes a hood or a belt. Or maybe it never leaves your hut, just hangs on the wall as proof that even accidents sometimes deserve a second look. Historians still argue whether true black was ever reliably achieved by Viking dyers. Most black garments were likely dark blue-brown or charcoal products of iron and tannin layered and coaxed into submission. But every now and then, you hit something close enough to pass in torchlight. And that was all that mattered. You spend the rest of the afternoon sorting the rest of the scraps, tying them into little bundles, labeling the oddballs, even winding a few into sample cards for future apprentices, because, let's face it, yours won't be the last. By twilight, the rain has softened into mist. The dog is snoring again. The dye hut smells like wet wool and the vague ghosts of every root you've ever boiled. You sit by the fire and show the apprentice your favorite skein from the sorting a muddy gold tinged with green. This, you say, was from boiled onion skins and a bad idea. He grins. We should call it kitchen mistake. You raise your mug to kitchen mistakes. You clink mug, sip what's left of the lukewarm tea, and watch the flames curl through the logs. Outside, the world is soft and soaked. Inside, you are warm and dry and surrounded by color. Even when the sky insists on gray, your life is anything but. By the next morning, the rain has vanished, left behind a field of shining puddles and a sky so clear it almost feels sarcastic. You stretch under the eaves boots, squelching as you step into the slushy courtyard. Everything glows. The grass looks greener. The rocks look cleaner. Even the dog who spent the night under a tarp chewing on a boot sole seems somehow more majestic in the sunlight. Today you mend. Not wool, not tunics, but skeins, the ones you tossed into the maybe later pile, the ones that came out too streaky, too dull, too loud, or just too weird to sell, the ones nobody else sees value in. You haul the crate out into the sun and sit on your bench with a mending basket at your feet. There's something wonderfully slow about this task. No fire, no cauldron, just you, your hands, a crooked needle, and a quiet sort of purpose. The apprentice joins you soon after holding a small jar of lanolin balm. My fingers are cracking again. You nod, rub it in. Don't eat it this time. That was one time. One memorable, terrible time. He sits nearby, cross-legged, working on his own mess of tangled thread. You glance over, occasionally correcting his technique with short grunts and sharp gestures. No need for words, you've been doing this long enough to teach by raised eyebrow alone. You begin with a blue skein, uneven from a rushed woad, dip the shade going from sky to smoke in one long breath. You decide to over-twist it slightly and loop it tighter. Not perfect, but it'll make a striking border yarn. Then there's the yellow that turned sour in the pot, too sharp, almost neon. You mute it with a second rinse in an iron bath. It comes out dusty mellow, like old straw in the sun. Much better. You work through the pile one by one, not fixing so much as reimagining. Historians still argue whether Viking dyers sold only their best skeins, or if the imperfect ones found their way into village homes trading bundles or children's mittens. Truth is, there's no such thing as a perfect dye batch, only good ones, and ones with stories. You hold up a skein the color of wet bark, ugly you once thought, but now in the right light it gleams with threads of deep red and mossy green, subtle as the forest floor. The apprentice notices. Why didn't we use that at the market? You shrug. Didn't know what it was back then. He nods thoughtfully. Looks like something a hunter would wear. You smile. Or a priest. Or a ghost. He raises an eyebrow. Ghosts wear dyed wool. Only the fancy ones. You keep working until the sun reaches its peak. The dog rolls over on his back legs, stiff in the air, completely content. The sheep nap against the fence. Even the dye racks seem to breathe easier in the warmth. You look at your hands again. Always stained, always dry, always doing something. You wonder if one day they'll stop shaking when you hold a needle. You doubt it. That's not how dyeing works. There's always tension, always friction. It's part of the magic. The apprentice sets aside a pile of now orderly skeins. Done. You inspect them. Not bad. He beams. You take one, the purple one from 2 weeks ago that looked like old wine in a cup, and run your thumb along it. Then you wrap it in linen and press it into his hands. For your sister's wedding, you say. He stares at it. Really? You made it. You might as well be proud of something. He holds it like it might explode, then runs inside to stash it somewhere he believes you'll never find it again. You look at the last skein in your lap, mossy green with soft brown streaks. It reminds you of your mother's shawl, the one she wore during rainstorms wrapped tight around her shoulders as she stirred the dye pots and muttered about goats. You set it aside, not for sale, not for barter, just for keeping, because sometimes the things no one wants are the ones worth saving. Evening drapes itself across the yard like a fresh dyed cloak, soft, slow, and deeply colored. You're sitting beside the fire pit again, spinning a scrap of wool between your fingers, not quite weaving, not quite doing nothing, just letting your hands stay busy while your mind wanders. That's how good things start sometimes, not with plans, with pause. The apprentice joins you with 2 bowls of something vaguely soupy. I think I made stew. You sniff it. Is it edible? I didn't hear the dog cry, so probably. You both eat in silence for a moment, savoring the heat more than the flavor. Your knees ache. Your back is one sneeze away from becoming a cautionary tale. But the day has been good. Very good. Then, as the fire crackles and the dog starts softly snoring again, the apprentice turns to you and says, "Why do you think people care so much about color?" You lean back, letting the question sit in the air a bit. The stars are just beginning to prick the sky. 1, 2, 3, then suddenly dozens. Because it's proof, you finally say. Proof that something was here, that someone took the time to make something out of nothing. He nods, chewing. Think about it, you continue. Most things fade. Wood rots, clay breaks, but a dyed thread that sticks around. You bury a tunic in a grave and dig it up 100 winters later, and it still has a bit of red left in it. That's not just fabric. That's a message. The apprentice's eyes widen a little, like time travel. You grin. Exactly, except stinkier. Historians still argue whether colors held symbolic meanings in Viking culture, or if people just wore what they had. Some believe red was for warriors, blue for farmers, and green for fertility. Others think color choices were mostly practical, based on what grew nearby, what didn't cost an arm and a sheep. But maybe it wasn't about what the colors meant, but that they meant anything at all. You rise slowly and walk over to the drying rack where the day's mended skeins sway like prayer flags. You touch each one gently, naming them quietly in your head. Stormrind, Hearthwood, Half Summer Gold, Riverjaw, Sparrow Eye. None of these names are official. They won't be remembered in sagas, but they make sense to you, to your hands, and that's enough. Back inside the hut, you open your old ledger. Not the business one, the other one. The one with the weird sketches, recipe failures, and rambling die notes scrawled in the margins. You add a new page. Green from overdyed weld, plus spoiled woad 2 days steeped best on cloudy days. Results a mossy mid-tone with copper streaks. Reminds me of that hill where the sheep got stuck. You pause, then add, name idea shepherd's regret. You chuckle. The apprentice wanders in and sets a few new skeins on the shelf. You notice he's begun sorting them by mood, not just shade. I like this one, he says, holding up a dusty rose color. You nod. It's a good summer cloak color. He studies it. It feels soft, like a memory. That's how you know it's real dye work. He looks at you with genuine curiosity. Do you think they'll still talk about dyeing in 100 years? You shrug. Maybe not about us, but someone will find a thread or a patch of wool or a color that shouldn't exist anymore, and they'll wonder. He smiles. That's enough, isn't it? It always has been. The fire burns low. Outside, the sky turns darker deeper. Inside, your fingers ache, and your wool smells like effort and success. And tomorrow, maybe black again, or a gold strong enough to blind an ox. But tonight, just quiet. Just color. Just you. You dream of color that night. Not just any color, something richer, older, stranger than anything your hands have coaxed from root or bark. It flows through your fingers like oil and smoke pooling into symbols you don't recognize on fabric you've never seen before. It hums, not with sound, but memory. When you wake, the dream clings like cobwebs to your thoughts. You lie still watching morning light creep across the beams, and you wonder what color was that. The apprentice wakes with a snort and sits up, hair stuck to one cheek. I think I dreamed about a cloak that glowed. Was it shimmering? Yeah, like moonlight in a puddle. You sit up, same here. He frowns. Is that normal? You shrug. We probably just inhaled too much woad vapor yesterday. Still, the feeling stays with you as you eat, as you feed the dog, even as you begin sorting herbs for the day's batches. You can't name the color. It wasn't red or blue or anything in between. It felt like longing, like the moment before something happens. A dye you couldn't make even if you boiled the whole forest. But that doesn't stop you from trying. You decide today you'll experiment, not to fill an order, not to prove anything, just to chase the feeling. You start with elderberry dried and ground. Add a splash of vinegar, then birch ash, a bit of stale wine. It's a ridiculous mix completely untested. The apprentice watches with the look of someone witnessing either genius or absolute culinary disaster. What is that supposed to make? You smile. No idea. We'll find out together. You steep it, slowly stirring every few minutes, muttering like a wizard with a bad memory. The mixture goes from plum to inky brown to a purplish gray with flashes of silver at the surface. You dip a small test skein, squeeze it gently, and hang it to dry. Then you wait. While the wool dries, you clean the workbench and dig into your dye journal. You open to a blank page and title it, "The Impossible Color." Historians still argue whether Viking artisans ever sought symbolic colors beyond function shades that evoked gods' emotions or omens. Some say it's modern romanticism. Others argue that certain dye mixes show evidence of ritual intent. But maybe, just maybe, there were days like this one when someone looked at a skein and said, "No, that's not quite it," and kept trying. The skein finally dries. You lift it to the light. It's not your dream color, of course it isn't, but it's close, dusky, iridescent in a way that wool shouldn't be, somewhere between storm shadow and melted amethyst. The apprentice squints. It looks like twilight if it had weight. You nod slowly. Twilight's weight. You tag it and lay it carefully beside the other samples. "Will we try again?" he asks. "Absolutely, because this is the heart of dyeing. Not just replication, not just trade and tincture and tradition, but chase, wonder, trying to catch something with wool and heat and stubbornness, and sometimes almost succeeding." You spend the rest of the afternoon experimenting with smaller batches, one with soot and elderflower, another with moss and vinegar-soaked nails. All failures, technically, but interesting failures. The apprentice writes down your notes without question, now even when you name things like River Ghost and Owl-Touched Blue. By sunset, your hands are stained all over again. The dye hut smells like every cupboard in the village dumped into one pot. Your feet ache, but your eyes sparkle. As you hang the final test skein, the apprentice asks, "Do you think we'll ever find it? That dream color?" You glance at the rack. Maybe. Or maybe it finds us when we're ready. He nods. "That's fair. I mean, color's kind of sneaky. Like goats. Like Froda." You both shudder. You sit together by the fire that night, not speaking much, just watching the flames flicker. Each burst of light casts new shades on the wool above. And for a second, just a second, you think you see it again. That color from your dream. It disappears before you can name it. But that's fine. Tomorrow you'll try again. Morning finds you bent over your dye ledger, flipping through pages smeared with decades of trial, error, and questionable judgment. Some pages stick together from spilled birch syrup. Others have margins full of side notes like, "Do not repeat." Stank for 3 days. You're looking for something. Not a recipe, not quite. A thread, a hint, some reminder that this elusive dream dye, this not quite color, isn't new, that you've brushed against it before and just didn't realize it. The apprentice stumbles in with a mouthful of honeyed barley cake. You've been up since before dawn. Are you dying or dying? Bit of both. He drops a half-crumbled piece of barley cake on your table. Eat. No use chasing colors if you pass out before lunch. You obey, chewing absently while you read. And then you see it. A page from 3 winters ago, stained with wine and annotated in your own frantic scrawl. Late-night batch, elder root seawater pine bark ash. Looked like nothing, but after moonlight drying strange shimmer. Apprentice said it looked like frost shadows. Skein disappeared next day. You stare at the last line. The apprentice swears he never touched it. You suspect the dog. Either way, the shimmer had happened before, and you'd let it slip through your fingers. Today that changes. You prep the mix exactly as written, minus the part where you left the pot unattended to chase down a runaway sheep. Elder root goes in first, pungent and earthy. Pine ash follows, dry and crisp. You add seawater from a jug you'd once traded with a salt merchant. The scent that rises is peculiar, like burned sage and old coins. You bring it to a simmer, not a boil, just enough to coax the pigments awake. Then you hang fresh skeins to mordant, 1 alum, 1 iron, 1 untreated. You're covering all your bases. The apprentice peers in. That looks like soup for ghosts. Don't give it ideas. You let the dye cool slightly, then start dipping. Each skein goes in one at a time, turned slowly, like it's being convinced. You mutter old words, not quite spells, not quite recipes, just things your grandmother used to say when she wanted a batch to behave. Something about listening to the thread instead of the pot. Historians still argue whether Viking dyeing had a spiritual or magical dimension. Some dismiss the chants and charms as superstition. Others believe they were part of a deeper worldview, one where color wasn't just useful, but powerful. A dyed thread could bless or curse. A wrong hue could ruin a feast or a funeral. And every dyer carried at least one story they didn't tell out loud. You leave the skeins to soak for an hour, stirring once every 7 minutes, like the note says. The dog circles the cauldron 3 times before curling up, which feels oddly significant. Then the pulling begins. First, the alum mordanted skein pale, at first then darkening as air touches it. A strange silvery gray with violet undertones. Not quite the dream, but close. Then the iron-treated skein, deeper richer, with something metallic clinging to the fibers. It looks like storm clouds catching fire. Your heart flutters. This might be it. Finally, the untreated skein, dull, patchy, not worth the effort. You hang them all to dry in a sliver of sunlight that's appeared through the clouds like a stage light from the gods. You and the apprentice sit beneath the rack, watching, waiting. The silence is sacred, and then it shifts. The iron skein changes before your eyes. As it dries, the hue blooms, swirls of shadow, and plum flashes of deep-sea blue. It's not just a color, it's a mood, a warning, a memory. You reach up and run your fingers along it. It's soft, strong, alive. The apprentice breathes out awestruck. What do we even call that? You smile slowly. Dream smoke. He repeats it like a prayer. You wrap it gently, tag it, and place it at the top of the rack. This one doesn't get sold, doesn't get traded. It stays with you. A reminder, a challenge. Proof that sometimes chasing color is not about the result, but about the question it leaves behind. What now, your apprentice asks. You glance out the door. The light is fading, clouds rolling in again. You grin. Now we try to make it better. The rain returns with a vengeance that night, none of yesterday's mild drizzle or poetic mist. This is a full-throated drum-beating downpour, the kind that makes the thatch sigh and the sheep collectively consider rebellion. You stay up late, reinforcing the hut, checking the dye vat covers, and praying the new skeins don't soak through. The dog refuses to leave the hearth. The apprentice, gods bless him, actually offers to sleep next to the racks in case they need rescuing. You pat him on the back, toss him a blanket, and let him. By dawn, the world is soggy but intact. You step outside and find your worst fears not realized. The dream smoke skein is untouched, thank the dye gods, and even the test batch from yesterday's odd recipe survived with only a few frizzed ends. The racks, the lines, the hut, all there. Is it a good omen? The apprentice asks as he wrings out his sleeves if the wool doesn't drown in its sleep. It means you tied the knots right. He looks proud of that. Today was meant to be routine. More weld batches, maybe a new test run on elder bark. Instead, the rain has soaked not only the land, but your plans. You pivot. Time to teach. You drag a crate from the back room, the one with scraps, old sample cards, even failed test skeins from before the apprentice ever showed up. You set it on the table with a dramatic grunt and gesture like a magician revealing a secret weapon. Lesson day. He groans. Again. You want to name dyes, don't you? I want to be warm and not wet. Too bad. You begin with the basics, color theory, the Viking way. Not the circles and spectrums you see in fancy books, but the old logic. Red from madder and rust, blue from woad, plus patience and prayer, yellow from weld unless you like onion skin more, green from luck, purple from courage, brown from compromise. You hand him test cards, make him sort by hue, then by depth, then by feeling. This one feels sad, he says, holding a dull blue. You nod. That's Widow Sky. Good eye. He grins. You pull out failed batches that became strange successes. A marigold yellow that turned green after weeks in sun. A violet made from blackberries that only works under moonlight. A streaky cursed ochre that somehow glows in frost. Colors, you say, are not just what we see, they're what we survive. He writes that down. Historians still argue whether early dyers had color charts or name systems. Most evidence points to oral tradition, intuition, and lots of pointing. Some scholars believe naming dyes was reserved for merchants. Others think every dyer had a personal system, stories whispered into the wool to help the hues stick. By mid-morning, you're both shoulder-deep in scraps, naming and sorting and bickering over whether something is smoky green or mossy betrayal. Then it happens. The apprentice pulls out an ancient, near-faded skein, one of your earliest tests so pale it's almost threadbare. He holds it up. "Why'd you keep this?" You pause. You reach out, turning the skein in your hands. It's barely there, a blush of color like windburn or the first pink in the sky. Because you say softly, "That was the first time I dyed something and didn't hate it." He stares at it. "It looks like possibility." You nod. "I called it before the fire." He writes the name down reverently. You both fall quiet after that, letting the rain tap on the roof while the fire crackles in the corner. The pile of scraps grows smaller. The lesson, though, feels bigger than you planned. Near sunset, you hang the final batch of reorganized skeins, clean labeled, full of old effort with new names. You brew a pot of nettle tea, and you both sit in the doorway, watching the puddles ripple with every drop. "You think I'll ever be as good as you?" he asks. You don't answer right away. You sip, let the flavor settle, and say, "If you care enough to ask, then yes." He smiles without looking at you. "Think we'll ever name all the colors?" "No, but that's the point." Outside, the last clouds part just enough to show a sliver of gold across the horizon, a color you've never quite seen before, and that's enough to keep going. You wake before dawn, not because of sheep or weather or dreams this time, but because something in your bones tells you today is the day. You don't question it, you just move. Outside, the world is blanketed in that soft, colorless pre-dawn light where even the brightest skein looks humble. The hut is quiet. The apprentice still snores, curled up in a pile of wool, like a very unproductive fox. The dog opens one eye, sighs, and goes back to sleep. You step into the dye yard alone. You breathe in the cold. It smells like wood smoke frost and the barest hint of pine, your old friend in all things dyeable. There, waiting on the rack from yesterday, is dream smoke, dried, set, final. You take it down carefully like it might vanish. The color hasn't changed, but you have. You see it differently now, not just a rare result, but a turning point. You place it on the work table and light a candle, watching the way the waxy light hits the fibers. It glows, not bright, not garish, but like it remembers something you don't, like it holds a secret. You sit and begin weaving, not a whole tunic, not even a scarf, just a band. A strip of wool, tight woven, careful, meant to hold only what matters. You use other colors too. Raven breath for the borders, widow sky for contrast, a knot of shepherd's regret near the center. No mistakes, no hesitations. Every twist feels earned. By the time the apprentice wakes and rubs his eyes, you're halfway finished. "What is that?" he asks, stepping close. You smile, eyes still on your work. "Something to remember this by." He nods like he understands. And maybe he does. After all, you've taught him more than dyeing. You've taught him to see. You finish the band by midday, stitch the ends together, and tie it around the old post near the dye vat. Not to display, not to boast, just to mark that you were here, that something happened, that color was made with hands and time and stubborn heart. Historians still argue whether Viking dyers signed their work or let it fade into the collective fabric of their households. Few names survive, but maybe the signature was never meant to be a name. Maybe it was the color itself. You lean against the doorframe, warm mug in hand, and watch the apprentice stack the day's skeins onto the shelf. He organizes them now by mood, then hue. He's started tagging them with little runes of his own, a system you don't quite understand but respect. The dog snoozes near the hearth. The fire snaps. The wool above you swings gently in the wind. You take one last breath of the season's cold air. You've taught the plants. You've learned from the wind. You've wrestled color from bark, root, leaf, and shadow. And you're not done. But maybe now, just for a while, you rest. Maybe the next dye will come from somewhere else, someplace you haven't yet been. A new dream, a new accident, a new question without an answer. For now, though, there's just this moment, this color, this band. Proof. So, as the sky darkens over your dye yard and the last wisps of steam curl up from the still warm cauldron, you lean back and let your body sink into the woven bench that's molded to your shape over all these years. You watch the wool dream-colored, rain-soaked, sunset-stained sway gently above the door like it's breathing with you. The apprentice has gone quiet again. He sits beside the hearth, rubbing lanolin into his hands, watching the fire reflect in his tea. Even the dog barely moves now, just the occasional twitch of an ear at the wind. You close your eyes. You feel the ache in your fingers, the weight of the day pressing against your shoulders. But it's a good weight, the kind that reminds you what you've built here, what you've coaxed into being. Every color still hanging in the hut, every scrap piled in your sorting crate, every name you whispered into wool, they're part of your story now. And someone someday might lift one of those threads and wonder how it came to be. Maybe they'll picture you here, in the quiet, in the dark, with nothing but heat fiber and a little hope. And maybe they'll chase the same colors long after you're gone. For now, you're here, you're safe, and you made something beautiful. Sleep well, dream of twilight skeins and starlit wool. You've earned it.